I'm Captain Entropy, and I've been assigned to brief you on 1980's The Untold Legend of the Batman.
DC Secret Files. DC Secret Files. Dead men and questions and villains so vile. Spectres and manhunters age on the dial. Mysteries, mayhem uncovered in style. Making our way through the pile. One by one we'll go through. DC Secret Files.
D.E.O. report for March 31st, 2025. At the urging of the Fire and Water Network, a number of agencies were taking part in an initiative to update our files on the Golden Age in general and the Justice Society of America in particular. I had prepared for a debriefing at the Themyscira House in Manhattan, but there was some last-minute upset that caused the Amazons to bar the entry of any men. I had to program a ladybot to take my place, and I was rerouted to the JSA Brownstone in Gotham City, which had been converted into a museum since their move to New York. An associate from the FW network, known informally as Shag, 3Gs minimum, was the host of Justice Society Retrospective beginning on the 1st. If you know Shag, April Fool's was a perfect date for him to serve as MC. I caught a ride with my old friend, Jose, aka Mr. Fix-It, and explained that I had decided to take advantage of the last-minute change. The DEO likes to keep close tabs on the vigilante activity that seemed to infest this burg like cockroaches, so I might as well touch base with my Batman guy while I was in town. Jose got annoyed that he wasn't my Batman guy, so I had to patiently explain that while I respect his knowledge base, particulars like a spot history of the Batcane Batgirl, the year Poison Ivy debuted, or just not constantly dropping F-bombs and recorded debriefings for federal agencies was perhaps not his forte. Tactful as I tried to be, I noted the way he peeled out as I stepped toward the brownstone to meet my contact.
Welcome to Gotham. I've got the Intropod all set up. So tell me, what do you want to know about Batman?
Welcome all to DC Secret Files, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe 1993 through 2011. Continuing the mission of Rob Kelly and the Irredeemable Shag's Who's Who podcast, we look at illustrated biographical pieces from the DC Comics catalog and discuss their merits. Joining me in stealing someone else's legacy is the modern-day podcrasher, a commentator on shows who now routinely shows up on the shows that he had commented on. These include Rollspine Podcast's own Dark Horse Presents Aliens, Two True Freaks' The Hammer Strikes, Brick Christ's Network's The Monitor Tapes, and the Fire and Water Podcast Network's Treasury Cast, Once Upon a Geek, Batman Family Reunion, JLU Cast, MASH Cast, and No Escape from Kurt Russell. Please welcome Captain Entropy!
Hello, Frank. It's always nice to work with a true professional.
And it's always a pleasure to have you. I'm glad you're crashing my podcast. We need you on this thing.
I'm happy to be here. I'm a little worried about you saying Podcrasher because I don't want Tim Price after me, and I think that's his title, and I think he knows Mephisto.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've yet to actually record with Tim, so I guess if he's got an axe to grind, he'll have the opportunity at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But take it out on me, Tim. I'm the one who's casting aspersions on your title.
Yeah, I'm still happy to be here, though. In the opening, I say, I'm Captain Entropy, and I've been assigned to debrief you on 1980's The Untold Legend of the Batman. This particular word, debrief, is a bugaboo for me. If I'm talking to the audience, then I'm briefing. If I'm talking to you, then basically a debrief is an interview. So
I wish I was recording that. Well, no, I do have it on Audacity. This is such a Captain Entropy inside baseball thing.
Yeah,
that's exactly the kind of thing I would expect, but I didn't expect it. It's like, oh, okay, so it needs to be briefing then, because I'm trying to use fancy pants spy stuff, and you're like, I know fancy pants spy stuff. You're just showing your. Explain to me the difference between briefing and debriefing.
All right, so briefing is just what it sounds like. You are on transmit. You are relaying information. Debriefing is an interview, but it's a semi-structured interview, and the way I do it and the way I've been taught to do it is I come in and I ask a very vague question for you to tell your whole story about whatever it is I'm debriefing you about. You tell your whole story, and then I'm making notes as I go and saying, okay, I want to follow up on this. I want to follow up on this. And then I have a list of questions that I want to make sure I get answered. And then I go away and I write a report. That's a debriefing.
And then after you've debriefed somebody, you would brief somebody on the summary of the debriefing.
Yes.
Okay. It's good to know this. I'm a fool, but I want to try to conceal that as much as I can.
You're not a fool. These are terms of art I just happen to be picky about.
I know we're a little tight for time, so we'll just dive right in. According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, The Untold Legend of the Batman was released on April 24th, 1980. It featured a 40-cent U.S. cover price and was edited by Paul Levitz. Cover art was provided by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, praise be his name. The Riddler, the Penguin, and the Joker prepare to open and read a giant book containing all the secrets of their most hated enemy. Opening the comic, In the Beginning was written by Len Wein, penciled by John Byrne, inked by Jim Aparo, lettered by John Costanza, and colored by Glynis Wein. Still recovering from having been caught in a warehouse explosion, Batman receives a package from his butler Alfred in the Batcave. It contains the tattered remains of the original Batman costume, worn to a party by Dr. Thomas Wayne when Bruce Wayne was a little boy. Thomas Wayne was kidnapped from the party to provide emergency medical services to the gangster Lou Moxon, but turned the tables on the mob to get them all arrested. Later, Joe Chill murders Thomas and Martha Wayne in a seemingly botched robbery. The freshly orphaned Bruce was cared for by Dr. Leslie Tompkins until he was adopted by his uncle Philip, then raised by his housekeeper Mrs. Chilton, secretly the mother of Joe Chill. Young Bruce trained to avenge his parents, eventually donning the costume of Robin, to anonymously learn from the world's greatest detective, Harvey Harris. Bruce grew to young adulthood, attending college for criminology, but upon graduation, realized he could never resolve the disparity between the law and justice as a policeman. Instead, he would become a bat. Years later, Batman and Robin finally identified and tracked down Joe Chill, but then Chill learned that Bruce was the Batman. However, he was killed by fellow criminals, angry upon realizing Chill was responsible for creating the Batman. Later, Batman discovered that Lou Moxon had arranged the Wayne's murder as revenge for his incarceration. Moxon suffered partial amnesia, but the memory of his guilt resurfaced when Batman confronted him while wearing his father's bat costume. Moxon was hit by a car while fleeing from justice. Cap, did you pick this up new, and what did you think of the cover?
I did pick it up off the stand. I was not quite 8, so it's hard to remember exactly what I thought of the cover at the time. I do know I was brimming with excitement over what was inside. Now, I will tell you, I love the concept of the cover because it kind of evokes the beginning of the Disney movies of the time where they'd start by opening a book. So it makes it a little homespun and folksy, but it's the villains sneaking a peek at secrets by candlelight. It's sinister at the same time. And the whole conceit of the series is that we're being let in on secrets, so it's perfect.
I think it's a cool cover. I don't remember ever seeing this one on the stand. My recollection is, I think it was typically back issues where I would see this because I wasn't a big DC collector at that time, but I would see the house ad for it. And so that piqued my interest, but it took a while before I actually got my hands on the original comic book. But I think it's a cool cover, and it's definitely one of those ones where it works as both a cover and as a house ad because it very much piques your interest. What are these guys going to find out by opening this gigantic book?
Yep. Yeah, it stays on theme.
Tell me what you thought about the book once you read it.
So Batman revealed his identity to Chill specifically. You talk about him learning his identity, and that's how it happened. That freaked me out at the time. I still think it's crazy, but Batman was still human back then, and he was dropping his discipline for the satisfaction of seeing Joe Chill's face. And I can understand that. But this whole series really was what it was advertised to be. It's a much more complete telling of who Batman was and how he came to be, that old phrase. It was a chance to know the character that we loved much, much better, and I think they did a great job. They weaved together all the glimpses into Batman's past that had come up in previous stories. And honestly, some of that was a stretch. Him being dressed as Robin as a kid while he was working with that detective was like, okay, I knew that was the one thing where I was, even as a kid, I was like, okay, I guess they had to include this. But the rest of it was amazing. They really made his whole life story as plausible as it could be in the context. And keeping things nearly plausible has always been part of Batman's appeal.
Definitely when I was first exposed to the story, it tripped me out that, wait, there was a Batman before Bruce Wayne, and there was a Robin before Dick Grayson. I didn't understand things like Silver Age versus Modern Age, and at this point they wouldn't have been relevant because all that was in continuity anyway. Even though they were in the midst of the Bronze Age, really that didn't disallow any of the Silver Age stuff for the most part. As an older fan, that kind of bugs me. At the time, it was just one of those novel things to know. It's like, oh, I know about the fact that Thomas Wayne was actually the first Batman. Ooh, so again, you're getting let in on these secrets that history didn't necessarily play out the way that the normies think it did.
Yeah, when we say Thomas Wayne was the first Batman, he went to a costume party in a cool bat costume. I mean, which, by the way, it's a minimalist costume, but I really like it. And then he gets involuntarily involved with these gangsters who need medical care. And that was just one more thing in Bruce's head that inspires him, along with the bat flying in the window and everything else. But it was like peeling back the curtain and letting in and knowing all the secrets. And that was part of the deal.
And of course, you've got Joe Chill gets deadened in this one. So it really is like a comprehensive look at what made the Batman. This is just as a single issue, this works really well in encompassing that. And this is probably my best single stop shopping opportunity to learn the origins of the Batman in that time period.
Yeah, and some of this they kept obviously for post-crisis. Some of this they didn't. Some of it still works better than the post-crisis stuff. I don't know, I guess you feel it more. They're really showing you who the 70s Batman is and where he came from. And that's kind of my favorite Batman anyway. So while I appreciate some of the post-crisis changes, this in my head is still the real origin, maybe.
One thing that was cool about the Thomas Wayne Batman suit is it actually looks like a bat. We sometimes forget how little the Batman actually looks like a bat that he's supposed to be representing.
Did you see the Stan Lee Just Imagine Batman series?
I didn't read that one. I mostly avoided it by that point in Stan Lee's career because I'd already been burned by Stan Lee coming back and writing comics a few too many times by then. So I know I got the Wonder Woman one. I can of all things I can picture the Robin, but I'm having trouble remembering what the Batman looked like in that line.
So it was a guy who was like, and I can't remember if it was Hollywood special effects guy or what, but that seems to stick in my head. So maybe that's it. But he looked like a bat. He honestly, in some ways, looked more like a bat than Man Bat does. And it was kind of creepy, but yeah, you're right. The actual Batman costume, it's almost like one of those old costumes that we would have for Halloween when we were a kid, where it's like, it communicates enough to let you know who he's trying to be, but it doesn't really look like that.
Yeah, he kind of looks like Vampire Man, really.
Yeah, Vampire Man with bat ears or horns. But, I guess that's the purpose of the chest symbol. If you don't get it, there it is.
Right. Now, do you know anything about the history of this book?
No, I know nothing about the history of the book. That sounds fascinating.
So this was the second DC Comics miniseries ever. I believe the first one was The Phantom Zone, wasn't it? Or something like that?
I think it was World of Krypton.
World of Krypton, okay. And then also this was the first Batman miniseries ever. And of all things, it's drawn by John Byrne, which unfortunately doesn't continue into the rest of the miniseries. And the story was that John Byrne heard that they were going to be doing this book, and he wanted the opportunity to do something with Batman, especially something that's going to be career comprehensive. And so he approached Paul Levitz at the Chicago Comic-Con that year and asked for the project. And they said, okay, great, we'll work with you on that. Shooter finds out about it, and he actually called Byrne a quisling. He was very upset that one of their top artists was doing work for DC and was not very keen on that happening. Terry Austin originally was going to ink him, his X-Men inker. So that was probably going to be pretty awesome. So what happens is, and this has happened a lot with DC, it's this big corporation, especially in the 70s versus Marvel. Marvel was a very small operation. You could turn on a dime then. But DC, the wheels turned very slowly. And basically Byrne had like a 3-month window to knock this book out when he would have the time to do it. And DC kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And they finally got him a script for the first issue. He did the pencils on it. He had tight pencils. But then when it came time for 2 and 3, they wanted him to work on that. And he's like, look, I gave you my window. You're out of my window now. I can't work on the rest of this project. So that's why they brought Jim Aparo in to ink him and to give it more of a visual consistency when Jim Aparo takes over for the second and third issues. Byrne was sort of persona non grata at DC for a while over that, but also DC was not in his good books either. So that's how we ended up with this John Byrne mash up with Aparo. And it's interesting because you can still definitely see the Byrne, but also there's so much Aparo in there. It's like this is a unique intermingling. And I remember when I first read the book, I wasn't as versed on styles, so I really couldn't tell when it switched from Byrne to Aparo. I can see it now, although again, from panel to panel, there'll be elements that are more Aparo, elements that are more Byrne. And DC said, oh, he just gave us loose pencils. That's why it looks like that. And Byrne said, no, I gave them tight pencils. Aparo made it look like that, so it would continue to look like Aparo for the other issues. So that's the story on that. But it's really nice that we had a chance to see the classic Bronze Age Batman drawn by Byrne in his prime. Whereas when Byrne finally started to fiddle with Batman later on, like with Batman 3D and with the Batman Captain America crossover, he was almost evoking the Silver Age more, and he just wasn't drawing in his classic style anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and you see some Batman or some John Byrne Batman in Legends, I think. In the first issue, I reread this a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly when in my history I realized that Byrne did the first issue, because in my head it was all Aparo because of that blending of styles. And you're right, you can definitely see the Byrne in it, but it's almost like you said, panel to panel, whether it looks more like Byrne or more like Aparo. And it kind of helps that their styles are not miles apart. It also helps that I love both of them on Batman. it all works, but I'm sorry. I mean, I'm sorry Jim Shooter reacted that way. I'm sorry that they gave Byrne no time because, I mean, honestly, Byrne's fast. If you have given him no time to complete the project, that's on you.
Well, especially DC in the late 70s, they needed a Byrne more than Byrne needed DC. Simple as that.
Oh, sure.
Both Aparo and John Byrne are heavily Neil Adams indebted, but they also took it in a more cartoony direction. So yeah, they actually are fairly simpatico in their styles. You wouldn't think about it. I would never associate a Byrne with Aparo under normal circumstances, but in this context, like, yeah, they do kind of make for a good match.
Yeah. I mean, Byrne has a little bit more flash and detail, but it's the same kind of adventure realism somewhere between Neil Adams and Johnny Quest.
For now, we're going to jump into the secret file for The Batman. The Batman was created for May 1939's Detective Comics number 27 by Bob Kane, technically and contractually, with massive repressed contributions made by Bill Finger. He's turned up here and there, and I think he's in a movie or TV show or something at some point. It's Bat time for our first Bat entry, taken from November 2003's JLA-Z number 1. The text reads, "A cowardly thug and 2 bullets in Gotham City's crime alley forever changed the life of young Bruce Wayne. Incited by the brutal murder of his parents, the orphan waged war against all criminals and spent every waking moment training himself to peak physical and mental condition, having mastered virtually all forms of combat and using his vast wealth to equip himself with the necessary tools for his cause. Wayne now protects Gotham as an urban legend, the Dark Knight known as the Batman. Though he possesses no superpowers, Batman's skill and intelligence places him among the most formidable, if not the most liked, members of the JLA." The Batman profile was provided by Mike McAvenny, writing the script, and Jim Lee with the art, colors by Alex Sinclair. The Caped Crusader is leftward facing in profile, standing amidst some gargoyles as he spies the bat signal in the night sky, filled with Gotham City Police Department dirigibles, which is a neat little touch. What did you think about this Jim Lee artwork?
I thought it was fantastic, and the dirigibles really sell it. And that's actually in my notes. That's the heading, dirigibles. I love the utility belt pouches that Jim Lee always includes because they look like real pouches. It adds to the plausibility I was talking about. Those dirigibles remind the reader of Batman, the animated series. I always thought, looking at that, when they show all those in the opening, that they really make Gotham look like a police state because you can see a lot from a dirigible and they're practically looking at everything. The gargoyles are there, which are a classic Batman trope. The heroic pose with the clenched fist looking up at the bat signal. This is a perfect image for a Batman entry.
And remind me, I know that they had the Superman image that Jim Lee did, and then there was a parallel Batman. I think it went the opposite way. I think it was a Batman image first, and then they did a Superman version, where they're essentially looking at each other from different directions, and one's in night, and one is days, all that kind of stuff. But this is kind of still that same image. Like, this is almost like the prototype for the image that became very iconic of those two sides of DC that Jim Lee would do once he actually worked on both those characters.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember the Batman and Superman from the Hush storyline with Jim Lee on it. Artists have stock poses, right? This is basically the stock pose we've seen Jim Lee do of Batman before, except it's turned, so he's kind of in profile more than in a lot of the Jim Lee takes. But that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. People have stock stances too. It's all good.
So what was your first exposure to Batman? How did you get to know the character?
My older brother was a comic book fan. Unfortunately, he mostly grew out of it. He would still get interested in something I had later and pick it up sometimes. But my first comic books were really his comic books. Super Friends was on TV when I was a kid. Batman 66 was on TV when I was a kid. There's not a time Batman has not been in my life. When I was a kid, he was cool, but I was more interested in the more colorful, super-powered guys, Superman, Spider-Man, etc. And he was still top tier, but as you get older and into your angsty teenage years, or even tween, Batman is just so cool. And all the reasons that the Irredeemable Shag says that everybody has a Batman phase, I latched onto. And then everybody knows I had a military career, came from a military family. There is a lot of not overtly militaristic, but a lot of, I would say, military adjacent or paramilitary or martial aspects to the Batman's discipline and how he does things. There was a lot of that resonated with themes that I had in my life, even growing up.
Back in the Secret Origins days with Ryan, I think I started saying the term primordials, these characters that have been along more before I have any conscious realization of when I would have been introduced to them. They were just always there. And of course, Batman, being one of the biggest superheroes of all time, was always there. And so, like, in comic books, I didn't have a lot of interaction with him, but the Batman 66 TV shows and reruns, cartoons, even the Scooby-Doo movies and things like that. I would watch him on, obviously Super Friends.
Yep.
So I knew where he stood in the greater context of the DC pantheon and such. And as a kid, I gravitated toward the books with the most bang for your buck, kind of like Siskoid, where if I can get Batman, that's fine. But if I can get Batman and Green Arrow, Batman and Superman, that's all the better. So I tended to get his team-up books in the Bronze Age when I was growing up. And very rarely did I pick up his solo title. It just didn't really grab me. So even though I liked Batman, and he was definitely one of the top heroes that I gravitated towards as a kid because he was the one who actually had media representation, and you could get an action figure and things like that of his, I would say my Batman phase was probably more like the common 88, 89, Dark Knight, Batman movie time period was more for me, even though I was very familiar with him through media. I was recently listening to Fire and Water Records Summer Jams 2025. Where the Daly Brothers capped off the podcast with the Prince song Bat Dance. Neil Daly talked about how his little brother had to hard sell him on seeing the 1989 Batman movie because he figured Mr. Mom and the Pee-wee's Big Adventure guy were going to redo the campy Batman of the 1960s. It reminded me of how media had shaped my own views of the pre-crisis Batman. And he was, as the kids say, cringe. He was a pudgy guy with an overly mannered Shatnerian delivery who hung out with a nerdy young boy with a nasally voice who told punny dad jokes. Batman was a dorky detective who solved crimes with the Scooby Gang and Batmite. Even in the comics, in the early 80s, they were trying to refresh the Batman Rogues Gallery with a bunch of corny new villains that never took. Around 1982, Batman entered into a committed relationship with Catwoman, who became his de facto partner. That made them feel like a married couple, which was a turnoff, especially when Robin was around to form a sort of nuclear Bat family. I just started to come around to liking the Robin I was seeing in New Teen Titans. So I was confused if there was a second Robin in the Bat books named Todd or something. He was clingy and whiny, so I wanted nothing to do with that guy. The book's Batman and Detective now had tight continuity, essentially the prototype for the Superman Triangle Number era, functionally one twice-monthly series. I liked Gene Colan on Tomb of Dracula and Doctor Strange, but I didn't care for his blocky, moody Dark Knight. Eventually, Tom Mandrake took over the other title, so the books more or less looked the same. The solo series weren't grabbing me, and since I liked the team-up books, I tried the one that paired Batman with Superman. I flipped through World's Finest Comics routinely, and was finally convinced by the swell Gil Kane cover on 289 to buy one. At Jimco, by the way. The story was The Krill Way of Dying by Doug Minch and Adrian Gonzalez, about alien tree slug things trying to reproduce. When they fail after an extended sequence of arbor porn and die, Superman and Batman were crying their eyes out, and I was just out. By 1983, Batman started stepping out with an albino lady named Nocturna, and some dude dressed like a second story man kept trying to stab the both of them. A spurned Catwoman and Robin started teaming up, and not only was I lost about what was going on, but they dragged it out across years. Once DC canceled The Brave and the Bold, the only thing they gave me to replace it with was The Outsiders, a team that looked as doofy as the rest of the then current Bat books. So I stayed away from Batman comics until 1986, because they simply were not cool. And there was nothing there that I wanted any part of.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you make about Brave and the Bold, because I understand the bang for the buck thing, but to me it was also that this was him interacting with people who weren't part of his normal world a lot of the time. You don't get to see him interact with other superheroes other than Robin on Batman 66. That Adventures of Batman cartoon that we had when we were kids, same deal. There weren't a lot of guest stars on that. Even World's Finest every month was a thrill because he was dealing with Superman. And then he would appear with Ragman or Sergeant Rock in Brave and the Bold. So that was kind of a thrill every time. And plus, I love the Jim Aparo art.
Exactly. Ragman specifically was one of the ones I picked up as a kid, and I liked that he was a gateway to these heroes that I'd never heard of. DC Comics Presents did the same thing to a lesser degree, but beyond him interacting with the greater universe, like I didn't know what a Ragman was until I picked up The Brave and the Bold, and I have a long-term affection for that specific version of Ragman because that's what I was exposed to as a kid. And then, of course, I didn't have the Neil Adams stuff in front of me. That was after my time, but stuff like the Peter Pan records or Power records where they would have the meeting with the Man Bat, and you could actually hear them interacting, and you see the gorgeous artwork. I definitely was a big fan of the hairy-chested 70s Batman.
where he was fighting Ra's al Ghul or Ra's al Ghul, whichever you prefer, the Silver St. Cloud stuff. And same here in that a lot of that stuff, I was just after that, right? So I would see references to it, but then I'd see reprints or a treasury or something, and it was gorgeous. And that was Batman as not just the super cop, he was also kind of the super spy. It was the height of the adventurer Batman, and that's still who he is in my head.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite Batman comics was the 8th annual in 1982, The Messiah of the Crimson Sun. And that was Mike Barr and Trevor Von Eden. So I wasn't getting the Neil Adams version of Ra's al Ghul, but that whole Batman as Bond, especially because I grew up on Bond movies. And so seeing that sort of represented in the comic books was a thrill for me. And I've always elevated Ra's al Ghul because he was in one of my favorite Batman stories ever that I bought when I was a kid. One of the few Batman books I bought just for Batman, but also that greater scope. Like, a lot of people really just want to see him as the Bat Cop in Gotham City, solving crimes and stuff. And that's great, but I do like when he has the more expansive adventures too.
I'm exactly the same way. I love that annual. What sticks out to me in my head about that annual is him and Talia taking a space shuttle to go fight Ra's al Ghul and rescue Robin, I think. I've seen enough government that I've seen, it's like the bureaucracy you would have to go through to make that happen, unless things are really hitting the fan. And then someone with authority comes down and says, nope, here's what's going to happen. It's bizarre, but it's also in my head not entirely implausible. Do you know what I mean?
It's a lot different than just asking Reed for one of his drafts, you know? It's like, it feels a little bit more real when you've got a little bit of bureaucracy in your way.
Yeah, exactly.
When you actually need NASA to get you up there.
Yeah.
Prince Daka, sinister Japanese underground agent, has conspired to steal a cache of powerful radium. But Batman and Robin crash into whirlwind action. Daka, the sinister Jap spy, believes Linda knows the whereabouts of the powerful radium gun. And what about Linda? Can she escape his evil clutches? Don't fail to see The Bat's Cave, Chapter 2 of Batman at this theater.
Maybe it's a voice.
Well, we'll soon know. Can you home in on it? We all hear that, Linda?
I really think we should worry about the hearing now.
All right, well, I found the quadrant.
God.
All I want to know is what is it?
Podcast.
Doesn't sound like any radio signal, huh?
Dark Horse presents Aliens.
I don't understand this.
Content.
All we know is that a xenomorph may be involved.
Excuse me, sir. A what?
What exactly are we dealing with here?
Comic book adaptations of 20th century Fox intellectual property.
How many different ways do you want me to tell the same story? I got into trouble. My ship, there was an accident. We found an alien creature. It was very dangerous.
Spoilers.
A creature that gestates inside a living human host. These are your words. And has concentrated acid for...
That's right. We sat down there on company orders to get this thing, which destroyed my crew and your expensive ship. When they first heard about this thing, it was crew expendable. The next time they sent in Marines, they were expendable too.
We don't have a lot of time, okay?
Oh, God, what are we listening to? Idiot!
Hey, what, has anybody else got a better idea? How long would it take you to do that? 20 minutes to an hour.
About 2 hours.
More like 2 or 3 with that.
We have been here for 3.5 hours.
I read your deposition, and it's great. If you just stick to that, I think we'll be fine.
Oh, I really hate to point this out, but it might be better off without oxygen.
Well, whatever the hell it is, we gotta catch it.
Look, man, I only need to know one thing. Where they are.
Did IQs just drop sharply? We homed in on its beacon. It's here!
This has been the Roald Stein podcast.
We have it on disc, so you better look at it.
Okay, put that on the screen for me.
Now move it, people!
Why don't you just check out
the Dark Horse Presents Aliens podcast?
Because I don't have to. Do you mind?
They think we're crud.
That could have been better.
Are you finished?
Moving on, we've got Jim Gordon, Gotham City Police Commissioner James Gordon, debuted alongside Batman in Detective Comics number 27, making him the Dark Knight's longest-serving supporting cast member. He's Batman's main police contact, the lighter of the Bat Signal, the caller of the Bat Phone, and the daddy of the Bat Girl. Mostly just a pipe-smoking exposition device for decades, Gordon was given a more sordid noir backstory and a key spotlight in 1987's Batman Year One, a story arc by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, and an evergreen classic that elevated him to protagonist, allowing him to start his own ensemble TV series years later. Commissioner Gordon made the leap to multimedia with Batman, early and often. He was in the Caped Crusaders' second movie series, 1949's Batman and Robin, portrayed by Lyle Talbot. Neil Hamilton played Gordon on the 1966 through 68 ABC television series, as well as the feature film. He debuted alongside the dynamic duo in animation on the Batman-Superman Hour in 1968, voiced by Ted Knight. Danny Dark did him in 1970's Super Friends cartoons, while Lenny Weinrib was his voice on 1977's single season of The New Adventures of Batman. Frequent Clint Eastwood collaborator Pat Hingle took Gordon back to the big screen in Batman '89 and its sequels. That also prompted the launch of Batman, the animated series in 1992, where Bob Hastings gave him voice for the better part of a decade across multiple Timverse series and numerous video games. Other notable Jim Gordon voice actors include Mitch Pileggi, Kurtwood Smith, Christopher Maloney, Gary Cole, Bryan Cranston, Ray Wise, Hector Elizondo, and Jonathan Banks. Ben McKenzie played a young Jim for 5 seasons of Fox Television's Gotham live-action prequel series. Gary Oldman played a middle-aged Jim Gordon in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, while J.K. Simmons played him in the Snyderverse, and Jeffrey Wright is his current avatar for director Matt Reeves. Now, I want to ask you right off the top, who's your favorite Jim Gordon actor?
Okay, I had a really hard time with this question because honestly, I have not seen a bad Jim Gordon, and there have been some very different interpretations, right? Pat Hingle is very different than Gary Oldman. I ended up having to go with the favorite actor, so I picked Jeffrey Wright. That's not favorite performance because I couldn't pick that, but I do want to see what Jeffrey Wright does with the performance going forward because I think he could do a lot. He's plausible as an action guy, as somebody who deals with the kind of world that Gordon does, but he's also an everyman you can relate to, like his performance as Felix Leiter. The main thing to me with Gordon is that if Batman has to be 70 to 90% real, Gordon has to be 100% real. And he has to be truly a good guy who is struggling against the bureaucracy and the crime and corruption and just fatigue to do what he can on Gotham's behalf. And he believes in the law, but he knows its limitations. And if you get all of that right, which I think almost all of the portrayals have, then it's hard to go wrong. The one exception that I would think of is the Batman 66 portrayal. They went out of their way to make Gordon and the police look a little buffoonish or incompetent, but that was for a comedic effect, and I excuse it because it's funny.
And really, if you look at the Batman comics of the time period, it's not like people like Jim Gordon were essential back then. It's like this is a guy who I think got elevated in the 70s, but especially in the 80s, to be a fully formed character. And before that, he was just a functionary to a large degree. He was adopted father or uncle of Barbara Gordon. He was the exposition machine for Batman and Robin. The actor accomplished the same role that he had in the comics on the show at that time. It's just the character evolved from that time and to the point where that interpretation is almost unrecognizable now.
The seminal work that you're pointing to is Batman Year One, which is mostly written from Gordon's perspective. And in that, you end up with more of his backstory, that there was something that happened in Chicago that brought him to Gotham, that he's prior military, that he was prior special forces somehow. When they brought in the whole military angle and especially special forces, I was concerned, and I have the same concern about Alfred later, that they were making him too awesome and too many things. But I am now at a point in my life where I have met a guy who was an MP officer who became a special forces officer and went on to great things. I've now met enough people who could all be candidates as most interesting man of the world that I will excuse Jim Gordon's amazing backstory.
And as far as the actors goes, for me, my favorite is Gary Oldman, mostly because that's a performance. A lot of times they find these salty earth kind of guys to play Jim Gordon, which is great. And, it comes naturally to them. But I love that Gary Oldman is not in any way Jim Gordon. He doesn't have the same accent. He doesn't look like that guy. He doesn't act like that guy. So I just appreciated what a fully formed performance that was. And also the fact that he was clearly most referencing Year One, which is my favorite Gordon. It's like, yeah, of course, that's going to be my favorite Gordon actor then because he's the most represents my idea of Gordon.
I almost picked Oldman because he does what I talked about making him 100% real. And you also see that the only difference between Gordon in Year One and Gary Oldman's performance of Jim Gordon is that Jim Gordon has already been burned in Chicago. And I think they've revealed since then exactly what happened. And I'm not 100% clear on exactly what happened, but he basically came in ready to crusade. There was some shadow over him. And he was like, nope, I'm going to be squeaky clean, and I'm going to be squeaky clean in Gotham. And that was basically putting a target on his head. The Oldman is not that guy. Oldman is a guy who he's clean, but he's also been trying to survive in Gotham. And that means that sometimes it was just shut up and go along. And I think he sees Batman as, oh, here's the ally I've been waiting for, who can help me actually make a positive difference on more than just my own morality.
We actually used 1997's Batman Secret Files and Origins #1 to derive our entry on Commissioner Gordon. The Jim Gordon Secret File was written by Scott Beatty, drawn by Lee Weeks, and colored by Tom McCraw. Gordon is on the roof in front of an unlit bat signal, wearing a trench coat with one hand on his elevated knee and the other in his pants pocket. What do you think about this image?
I think it's terrific because it does communicate that he is a commanding presence. He's waiting for Batman, obviously, by the bat signal, but there's nothing about him in his stance and the way that he's portrayed that looks like he isn't capable on his own. So I very much appreciate that. He looks like an aging action hero who's now in command, and he's got the safety fence on the roof of GCPD, which I think is very wise.
Yeah, it's a great image. Perfectly captures the character as presented particularly the post-crisis era. And like I said, I love year one. I read the first issue and then had to go back and get the trade paperback through the other ones. And that was already a very Jim Gordon-centric issue of a miniseries or a series within a series that was focused on him. But especially that fourth issue is really about him and how he interacts with Bruce Wayne and the proto-Batman and his personal failings and his personal conflicts. It was a great way of getting into who that person is beyond the exposition machine of the old comic books. And I love that. He was also great in Dark Knight Returns. So in the late 80s, when I was reading that stuff, it really did make it feel like this was Jim Gordon's city and Batman was just in it sometimes, you know?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I very much dig that take on him. And I also like too that he's older, he's been burned. He's not necessarily the guy who's going to be on the beat because he's Commissioner Gordon, right? So he's very much a guy who's lived that life, but he's now at a point where he needs a guy like the Batman to get the things that he couldn't get accomplished done. He's perfect for this world. And where there are a lot of people in the Batman family that I've gotten burned out on over time, Batman included, I've never gotten tired of Jim Gordon. I like that he is so much that guy who wants to do the best for everybody, but also has to deal with the realities of a deeply corrupt city and the politics and everything else and navigating all that. I just respect the heck out of the guy because he's always kept that pureness to him, but he can't help but be adulterated by his surroundings and the life that he's chosen.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, as an analysis. And I think the reason we never get tired of Jim Gordon is because Jim Gordon is not over the top. He is just real. He's the guy you want in that job.
I do wish he'd gotten to keep Sarah Essen in his life, though. I really didn't appreciate her fridging. And it was so obviously a ripoff of Seven. And it's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of Greg Rucka, because he gets all these feminist bona fides, and yet he'll do stuff like kill off Sarah Essen to cap off an event in the most derivative way possible. So I really wished they'd left that alone.
Well, I agree with you, but it's also in that era, they were really taking Joker to excess. He'd done stuff in Dark Knight Returns that pushed boundaries. I've talked with other people lately about how people learn the wrong lessons from success. And I think this is a case of that, where it's like, oh, people like it when the Joker is totally gross and psychotic. We're going to do that all the time. So this was another example of that. It really got me to a point where I still read good Joker stories, but I would actually be okay. And this is a weird segue to the next one, but I would be okay if I never read another Joker story.
Yeah, that is a perfect segue. So good going with that. Let me go ahead and get some of the background material down first. The Joker was created by Bill Finger, Jerry Robinson, and least of it all, Bob Kane. He debuted in spring 1940's Batman #1, story #1. They knew what they had immediately, given that Joker returns in the very same issue for the 6th and final story. Then appears in more issues than not out of the first couple dozen. He makes nearly 60 appearances in the Golden Age, and half again that in the Silver Age. He was given about 4 years rest before returning in 1973's The Joker's Five-Way Revenge by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. He was the rare supervillain to receive his own short-lived solo series in 1975, and barely a year has gone by since, where the Clown Prince of Crime hasn't been in multiple comics. The Joker's live-action premiere was on the 5th and 6th episodes of the 1966 Batman show, portrayed by Cesar Romero, who reprised the role many times, including in the feature film from that same year. Joker was on the first episode of the 1968 cartoon, The Adventures of Batman, voiced by F Troop's Larry Storch, who reprised in a couple of 1972 The New Scooby-Doo movies. Lenny Weintraub took over for 1977's The New Adventures of Batman, while Frank Welker played the Joker in a 1985 episode of the Superpowers team, Galactic Guardians. The Joker also had action figures from Mego, both in doll and Star Wars dimensions. Our reference for this entry is from the 1996 SkyBox DC Outburst Firepower embossed trading card set, number 41, drawn by Norm Breyfogle. A formal-looking blonde woman, possibly a newswoman, lies dead on the ground with a rictus grin on her face. The Joker is kneeling at her side, kissing her cold hand. Blood splatters the background. The card reads, "Funny, like a funeral. His face permanently twisted in a grin of insane evil. This madman will murder on the merest whim. They say all evil is redeemable, not the Joker." So this is very much a post-crisis Joker-ish image, whereas the stuff that we grew up on, I think, was definitely more about the clown prince of crime and more about the spectacle and the anarchistic quality. And the Joker used to be one of my absolute favorite villains, for sure. But when they turned him into a serial killer and they made him too realistic, it made him too irredeemable. And he went from one of my favorite villains to a guy that not only do I not like to see in comics anymore, but like me and my friends will go to a comic convention and we'll see people dressed as the Joker or driving vehicles that have been wrapped to look like the Joker. We judge people that like Joker in that way in the modern context because he's just such a creepazoid now. And I really miss that more flamboyant, fun Joker of the Silver and Bronze Ages. And even the Golden Age was a dark dude. He definitely killed a lot of people, but at least they weren't real people. You know, they were guys who were invented just to die. You know, it wasn't so bad as killing off Jim Gordon's wife and stuff.
It is disturbing how popular he is now, considering how he's portrayed. And I liked him when he could be more colorful, and he was still lethal. He was still dangerous, but they didn't show you how gleeful he was about the brutality all the time. Yeah, so the image is great because it shows both Jokers in a way. It's a little cartoony, and it's very much an outfit that Joker's wearing that he could have worn in 1972. Or Cesar Romero could have worn, but it's also obviously very much the lethal post-crisis Joker. It's Norm freaking Breyfogle, as Chris and Ryan say. He's always a delight. The Joker appears very delighted with this murder. It's a little cartoony, a little abstract. It's very sinister. It shows you both that the Joker is evil and that he is not quite right in the head. So the blood spatter in the background makes me wonder if Breyfogle is trying to show us how Joker sees the world.
Do you have any recollection of your first exposure to the Joker, or is it one of those, again, Batman was there, Joker was there, they were just always there?
I'm almost positive it would have been Cesar Romero on Batman 66. I mean, it could have been Super Friends, but was he ever on Super Friends?
I don't think so. I don't think he ever made it. I think he was in The New Adventures of Batman in 77, but that had probably been a little late, right?
Yeah, well, that could have been that. Could have been The New Adventures, but probably it was Cesar Romero. So I was going to say maybe I'm always biased towards a less lethal Joker, but honestly, that Joker, as broadly as Cesar Romero played him, was pretty sinister too, given the Batman 66 scale. I have a friend that I used to work with, still see sometimes. Once we realized that each of us were comic book geeks, we almost went into comic speak immediately in front of normies, and they were surprised. But one of the things we were talking about was the Joker. And he said, I will believe a man can fly before I believe the Joker would still be alive. And he was talking about the post-crisis Joker because he's the kind of guy that something would happen to him on the way to the prison. And I think that's true.
Absolutely. I mean, you can only play I'm a criminal genius so far when you're so disempowered by being in somebody else's custody. And this dude is just racked up too much of a body count, hurt too many people in too painful ways. So it was way easier to believe him as whoo-hoo. And, you know, Cesar Romero, even with the pancake over the mustache, was still so much my Joker for the longest time. And he's still, to some degree, the person that I compare other Jokers to, because I think he just nailed it, and that show nailed it in the best way you can to have a Joker that you could tolerate existing in the world with you.
Yeah, and we're legally required, I think, to mention Mark Hamill and the animated Joker from those series. And of course, awesome. I think he rode the line between those two interpretations.
Yeah, in terms of just pure performance, nobody touches Mark Hamill. Simple as that. He has the voice. It's the perfect voice. But for physical manifestation, when I look at Cesar Romero, I still see the Joker more than I see probably any other actor. Even with the everything else that comes with Batman 66, I guess that world fits the version of the Joker that I like best. So that's why it's one of the reasons why I like that version the best.
Well, and the grease paint over the mustache is ridiculous, but so is Batman 66. Even outside of Batman 66, the Joker is ridiculous, so you have to forgive it.
And I don't recall seeing the Joker very often in comic books in that time period, but I did have a few that I remembered. I used to have the Whitman coloring book from 1980, Batman, The Mystery of the $1 Million Joke. And then I had, from libraries, I'd check out the great comic book Superheroes, which had Joker material in it. You had Batman from the 30s to the 70s, which was at the libraries. And that was one of my chief exposures to early Batman stuff. But also, my brother was a big Batman guy for a while there, and he bought 1989's greatest Joker stories ever told. So those all informed my opinion of who the Joker was. So I've got a decent history throughout the Gold, Silver, Bronze Age, even if he wasn't like somebody I had a lot of exposure to beyond that. And a lot of that was later exposure to. But I guess pretty much throughout school and everything else, I still had access to those books. So again, the Joker was a fairly constant presence for me.
Yeah, he was also heavily merchandised in the 70s and 80s, even though he was not overexposed in the comics. And maybe that's just because he's colorful and a striking image. But even if you had never read a Joker story, you knew who he was.
Moving on to Catwoman, the Bat was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger for National's Batman #1, fourth story. At that point, Selina Kyle was just a femme fatale thief working a yacht in a green dress. Obviously not as immediately striking as the Joker, and therefore less prolific. She added a yellow hooded cloak in Batman #2, where she helped the dynamic duo catch the Joker, but that only did so much for her profile. She switched to an orange dress with a giant vampire collar and cape, with an enormous house cat mask in Batman #3, which killed any momentum. She then sat around until Batman #10, where she got way kinkier in black satin with a purple cape, but still the daft minor league mascot cat face. Unless you were a proto-furry, it fairly killed the sex appeal. After a single panel cameo in World's Finest Comics #6, she dyed her hair brown, switched back to the green dress, but kept the orange cape, cat helmet, and was still cat-woman in Batman #15. Black and purple for Batman #22, and a blonde escaped convict in Batman #35. But here she's finally in a purple dress with matching Batgirl cowl and green cape. That seemed to help, as she returned in this look 8 months later for A Christmas Yarn in Batman #39. Finally, the classically styled, brunette, hyphenless Catwoman made her cover feature debut in 1947's Detective Comics #122. She was seen twice again that same year in Batman, one another cover feature. Only one story in 1948, took 49 off, another cover in 50, and 2 in 51. Selina's never before or since seen brother Carl, the King of Cats, joined her in Batman #69. The Silver and then Bronze Ages firmly embraced Catwoman, with over 75 appearances through 1986. She finally ventured outside Bat stories with 1966's Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, #70 through 71. In 1967, she switched to a skin-tight catsuit more in line with her media appearances, but with the odd and unfortunate choice to color it green. In 1969, she switched to blue and black with a large red-orange pointed domino mask. In 1972, she fought Black Canary, and then the depowered Wonder Woman, more or less the same difference. Catwoman returned to the classic purple and green dress in 1975 and had another row with the Joker in his solo title. The non-costume Selina Kyle became a routine supporting character in Batman titles in 1978 until Catwoman's return in 1980. She had mostly reformed, serving as Batman's girlfriend and crime-fighting partner in the absence of Robin. The Earth 1 Catwoman got her first solo story that year, doing way better than the deceased Earth 2 Catwoman that had married Bruce Wayne and birthed his daughter Helena, who grew up to avenge her death as the Huntress. Although she had to compete for Batman's attention with the likes of Talia and Nocturna, and for a stint was stuck with a Jason Todd Robin as her sidekick, she was a monthly fixture until the end of pre-crisis continuity in 1986's Batman #400. Just to twist the knife, at the end of the year, there was a 2-part Detective Comics story by Mike W. Barr and Alan Davis, where the Joker destroyed Catwoman's mind to revert her back to villainy. Skipping to serials and radio, like most Batman villains, Catwoman had to wait for the 1966 ABC TV series to get media representation. Julie Newmar originated the role in episodes 19 through 20 of the first season, and was in 11 episodes of the second season. In between, she was replaced in Batman the Movie by Lee Merriweather, as Newmar was committed to another movie, Monsieur Lecoq. Likewise, Newmar was busy filming McKenna's Gold during season 3. and was replaced by actress-singer Eartha Kitt, who did 5 episodes. Jane Webb introduced her to animation in 1968's The Batman and Superman Hour. In the mid-70s, her uncredited voice can be heard on several Power records, including Challenge of the Catwoman and The Catwoman's Revenge. The only action figure I'm aware of from this period was the 70s Mego doll in the blue and orange getup. Our reference for this entry is from the 1994 SkyBox Batman Saga of the Dark Knight trading card set number 47 and the first of many. It was painted by Brian Stelfreeze and features a year one-ish Catwoman in a skin-tight purple suit lying on her left side. She's hissing at the viewer while petting cats on both sides of her while wearing a diamond necklace. Card text reads, like her namesake, Catwoman is a contrary creature. Though she is chiefly a jewel thief, Selina Kyle lives by her own code. She does whatever she feels like, particularly if whatever involves thrill and risk. But she always goes against the grain. If she is surrounded by good, she is bad. But if she is surrounded by bad, she is good. If she is surrounded by Batman, meow. Now, I tried to find an image that would be within the constraints of the show featuring the Golden to Bronze Age Catwoman, and I just couldn't find anything. This was the best I could do was Brian Stelfreeze, but if the best you can do is Brian Stelfreeze, it's pretty darn good.
It's a well thought out image. In all of these, they're trying to show you as much of who the character is in one panel, essentially, as they can. Brian does it here. Has Selina appearing hostile while laying among jewelry and petting cats. I mean, that sums up a lot. It's a very dark image. It's different than how we normally see her because it's painted, but it works. And I really like the point the text on the card is making here about her being contrary and how it's interesting in her history, and you actually pointed this out to me in your notes, that her duality or ambivalence was effectively built in from the beginning. And I guess at some point I had thought that was a later addition, or I had known this but changed it in my head, so that was a good reminder.
Well, I mean, that's what they loved in the Bronze Age when Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams were doing their thing, was so much of it was just going back to the original stories and finding what made those characters appealing in the first place and bringing that forward. But of course, Catwoman struggled for a long time because in terms of visuals, they kept putting giant, stupid cat heads on her, and, you know, she's got the cape and everything else. It took a long time to really get those visuals right. It was media exposure, once again, before the comic books. And so I'm used to her in the skin-tight cat suit, which I think they did in the cartoons as well, but I don't have a strong recollection of the cartoons the way that I do Batman 66. And so I always had this dissonance where it's like, shouldn't she be in the cat suit instead of in a dress with a cape and it's green? And what's even going on with this suit here? I always struggled with the classic Catwoman image. Once they figured out what that image was, they persisted into the 80s.
I'm not a fan of the cat head mascot mask. I've actually liked every other interpretation of her costume because I was a kid when she was in the purple evening gown with the slits and the cowl on her head. I guess it's not something that you would actually fight and do cat burglary in, but I wasn't thinking about that when I was in elementary school. But I'm a fan of all of them. I think the basic gray year one cat suit is probably the best. You know, later on the goggles get added and those are a good addition.
Yeah, I specifically, one comic book that stands out in my mind was 1980's Batman number 324 by Lin Wein and Irv Novick. Although I want to say that it was a Jim Aparo cover, but I'd have to check on that. And it has Batman like pulling Catwoman out of a drain pipe. I would just look at that cover and just be like, what's cat-like about this, you know? And you have to do so much more whip work when you're in that outfit. I love Catwoman, but if it's not Batman 66, if it's not the cat suit, then I'm not really super into it. I've never been able to wrap my brain around. You have to do so much more with the minions. She's not doing enough stuff for herself. I'm not a fan of the dress at all.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. Some things you accept when you're a kid that you wouldn't if you'd come at it even just 2 or 3 years later. So I think that's probably the difference. She reminds me of an old girlfriend, but should probably leave that there.
Nebbish bookworm Jonathan Crane was predisposed to a life of crime by the relentless cruelty of his peers who nicknamed him the Scarecrow for his lanky frame. As a boy, Crane delighted at frightening birds, a pastime that grew into a fixation with fear. First as a professor who conducted unconventional experiments on his students, and later as the master criminal who terrorized Gotham City with fear gas, the Scarecrow. Dr. Jonathan Crane debuted in the final story of fall 1941's World's Finest Comics number 3, credited to Bill Finger and Bob Kane. At that time, Superman front-loaded the title, while Batman and Robin finished it. But the horrific imagery of the Scarecrow might have contributed to it being buried. He was a long and lanky creep, the notorious university professor obsessed with instilling fear, though in that first story it was achieved through imagery, smoke bombs, and gangster executions with an automatic pistol. He returned only once more in the Golden Age, as the cover feature of 1943's Detective Comics number 73, heralded as by popular demand. Again, though, he is more about Tommy guns and pistol whipping, so the familiar formula wouldn't be set until the Silver Age. Even then, Scarecrow had less than a dozen appearances through the pre-crisis period. Fright of the Scarecrow was truth in advertising for 1966's Batman number 189. At least the Infantino Giella cover with Batman hung by his cowl over a cliff. The corny interiors by Gardner Fox and Shelley Moldoff were far less intimidating, as Scarecrow now relied on jungle cats. Fear Toxin finally was formulated in 1968's Batman number 200 by Mike Friedrich and Chick Stone, of all people. Despite his horror bona fides, the Scarecrow co-founded the Injustice Gang in 1974's Justice League of America number 111, and then he butted heads with the Joker in his solo title in 1976. He was still with the Injustice Gang the following year for Justice League of America number 143, and again in 1978's Justice League of America number 158. In 1977, he was part of the festivities in the multi-part Where Were You on the Night Batman Was Killed? In 1980, he dipped into the extra-canonical Super Friends, and he was part of the Legion of Villains featured in the 50th anniversary Detective Comics number 526. Technically, his last hurrah before the big continuity reboot was Batman number 400, but Barr and Davis used him in the 1986 Gray period in Detective Comics number 571. Presumably too scary for live action, Scarecrow had to wait for 1968's The Adventures of Batman, part of the Batman-Superman Hour, to cross over into broader media. He was voiced by frequent animation narrator and all-around utility player Ted Knight, later of the sitcoms The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Too Close for Comfort. Don Messick was his voice on another supervillain team, the Legion of Doom, from 1978's Challenge of the Super Friends. Andrei Stojka took the role for 1985's Superpowers team, Galactic Guardians. This issue was taken again from SkyBox Saga the Dark Knight, card number 51, Nemesis, which is the subheading, Nemesis the Scarecrow, painted by Mike Mignola. The villain is sitting on a stump, knees wide apart, holding a human skull with both hands in his lap. He's surrounded by pumpkins and moths drowning in either fog or pollen. A raven sits behind him on a ramshackle fence post, and everything is orange against the harvest moon. This image rocks, right? I'm not alone in thinking this is just killer.
No, you are not alone. By the way, great description. Mignola is perfect for this. It is gorgeous. It looks like a piece of Halloween art you'd frame and put on the wall. The fact that this is Crane is almost superfluous, right? Because his look as a character is so classic, it could be any scary animated Scarecrow. It could be the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz if he took a dark turn and suddenly had a human head in his hands. I would literally frame this and put it on the wall, especially around Halloween time.
What's nice with Scarecrow is there are a lot of people who really want a grounded Batman. They don't like him getting into the supernatural. But it's very difficult to look at the Scarecrow and not get a supernatural vibe from him. He's a horror character that doesn't necessarily belong with Batman. But you can also explain it away with the science. It's fear gas. It's hallucinations. He isn't that tall. He isn't that lean. You know, there's ways of working way around it to rationalize it so that he still works within a grounded Batman sphere. But it's really cool to have this horror element mixed into the Batman stories. And you can, because of the fear gas, you can go to places with this character that you can't with other characters. And also you've got that get out of jail free where even if bad things happen in the nightmare, it isn't necessarily his fault and it isn't even necessarily really happening, but you've got the imagery and you've got that visceral reaction when you're reading about it in the stories.
Yeah, you're right. And I hadn't thought about that, but it's absolutely a way for them to play with the supernatural without actually doing the supernatural. So it's a cheat, but it's a good cheat. The point I take away from that is he shows you how scary the natural world can be. I've never bought the idea that he could have a gas that made you afraid of water or a gas that made you afraid of clowns or whatever. That just seems too weirdly specific for me. But the idea that he has something that is a hallucinogen that also makes you terribly afraid, I'm 99% confident somebody could produce that in a lab somewhere today. So he's one of those characters that is super plausible to me.
Scarecrow is another one. I really did not know him from the comics at all. I don't remember ever seeing him in comic books when I was growing up. It was entirely media. And because he wasn't on Batman 66, it was always animation specifically. Part of the Legion of Doom. You know, this what I know him from is he's almost like the emissary to the greater DC universe for me as a kid because he got around in those animation circles in a way that the Joker didn't, as a for instance.
I did know him from the comics, and I specifically remember a great Don Newton story that involved Batman and Batgirl fighting Scarecrow, and I specifically remember that Don Newton does a great Batgirl. He was a moody artist anyway, so he was perfect for the Scarecrow. He's interesting because Batman also trades in fear, right? So the difference between them is not as stark as Batman would probably like it to be.
I used to, as a kid, love Dark Mirrors, and to some degree I still do, but it's way better when you got a character like the Scarecrow that trades in a lot of the same actions as the Batman, trades in some of the same kind of imagery, although obviously his imagery is different, but it's meant to evoke the same fear and compliance potentially, or he's going to make sure you do what he wants you to do based on what you're projecting outwards, right? So he's got that commonality with Batman, but you're not going to confuse either one of them. So I dig that about him.
Yep, I agree.
But just to give you a sense of how little exposure I had to the Scarecrow, I'm pretty sure the first time I saw him in a comic book, and again, I have to stress, in my area, DC comics were not well circulated. They did not really hit the stands as much. I think it was 1987's Detective Comics 571 with the art by Alan Davis. That's how long it took me to recognize a Scarecrow comic when I went looking.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, the truth is that's only 5-6 years later than me, but when you're a kid, that's forever. Another interesting thing about that, though, is like not recognizing him from the comics. His look is so common and his name that he's uncopyrightable, I think. And Marvel also has a character called Scarecrow who doesn't look that different. You could almost see him on the stands and think he was part of the background.
Absolutely. But what's funny is because everybody associates the Scarecrow with Batman, even when you have the Marvel Scarecrows, they look enough like the Batman Scarecrow that there is a little bit of like, wait, which one is this again? This isn't Jonathan Crane? You know, like you still, in comic books, in this sphere, you still go back to the Batman Scarecrow, regardless of how the imagery really isn't specific enough to say, okay, that's the Batman Scarecrow. You could put him in a lineup, and I'm sure people would get confused about who's who, but you still associate it with Batman in comics. Simple as that. It's like Batman owns the concept of Scarecrow, even if that character happens to be popping up in the Marvel universe. You know, you have to stop and think about how that can even work.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you think? I'm curious. What did you think of the Nolan-verse Scarecrow?
I enjoyed it. I like that, perfectly cast, perfectly presented. Yeah. Although probably he's too pretty. You know, it's hard to get around. He's so much prettier than Crane should be. But he definitely, one of the things that's always been interesting about that actor is that he can't help but project that creepiness. He's just a scary looking person. He has that energy to him. And it's actually hard for him to play more sympathetic characters. And I love that you were able to see Scarecrow throughout the three movies. You know, he's the guy who keeps popping up over and over again. So even though he doesn't get his own movie, he's a presence in all three. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. And that to me is a more plausible reading of Gotham, I think, is that these guys are just around and they may not be top of Batman's list this week to deal with, but yeah, you know, but it's a dangerous place.
Batman and Robin learn from a radio broadcast that an attempt will be made to steal some diamonds from a cargo plane. Flying the plane, they outdistance another which pursues them, but are forced to Earth by the stolen remote control machine. Who is this mysterious wizard? What new villainy are his men up to? Will Robin have to carry on alone? What startling development has Vicky discovered? Don't fail to see Robin's Wild Ride, the third thrill-packed chapter of Batman and Robin.
Star Trek, comic books, mythology, video games, toys, Star Wars. Just about any geeky topic you can think of could be covered on the Hammer Podcasts, presented by Two True Freaks. Come join me, Gene Hendricks, for whatever my disjointed mental processes can come up with. And be careful, or you might just learn something before we're done. The Hammer Podcast is available monthly, both on its own iTunes feed and at twotruefreaks.com.
For years it has been whispered, in the dark dens of the wicked, in the bright halls of the just. Now at last it can be told.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, Untold Legend of the Batman #2 was released on May 22nd, 1980. It featured a 40-cent US cover price and was edited by Paul Levitz. Cover art was provided by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. With Robin in the driver's seat, the Batmobile rockets out of the Batcave as Batman leapt from the back of the car toward the passenger seat. In the background, Alfred tends to the Bat computer. Inside the comic, With Friends Like These, was written by Len Wein and drawn by Jim Aparo, with coloring by Glynis Wein. Robin halts a borderline unhinged Dark Knight's battering of random hoods for information on the violation of his Batcave. This prompts the first of a new round of Flashback-a-Palooza, starting with Dick Grayson's origin story, up through his going off to college and Bruce's move into the Wayne Foundation building. Next up is Alfred recalling his time fighting Nazis in occupied territory, his brief return to his first love, the stage, and finally being compelled by his dying father to continue a family legacy of servitude. Alfred soon discovers the secret of Batman and Robin, joining in as their primary support. Sifting through a table full of villainous photos, we recount the journey of the Red Hood to the Joker. We see Harvey Dent's acidic baptism into Two-Face. Finally, Robin is nearly killed by an exploding Batmobile. What do you think about this cover?
So I have to say, this is my least favorite Untold Legends of the Batman cover because it's just them in the Batmobile. I think that JLGL PBHN makes this as exciting as it can possibly be. And of course, I still love it because it's from this series, but I think I like the other two covers better.
It makes me mad because I did not have in my possession a copy of this story, and they solicited the Treasury edition, so I went ahead and picked that up. This is the cover that they used, and it's like, of all three of these covers, this is the one you chose to use, but I assume it's in part because they'd already used the other two covers elsewhere. But yeah, I don't love having this giant version of this particular cover. Not that it's bad, it's just such a number 2 cover, and you want the number 1 cover on a big Treasury edition where you've got the best presentation in terms of dimensions, whereas it's essentially a poster.
Yeah, and this could have been the cover to any Batman story, and the cover to number 1 is, okay, we're telling secrets. So that would have made more sense. I wouldn't have even minded if they had done a brand new cover, if they'd done it right.
And the story is cool, though, because we're getting into Robin's history, and I think the Robin is often undervalued as part of the Batman formula. There's always these people who want to take Robin out of it, and I think that that's a slippery slope because I think things always tend to get too dark, too grim, too incel when you don't have a Robin around to balance out the Batman. So I was really happy to see that they got so much into Robin here. And also I dig that they give us a lot of Alfred stuff. This was very much my first exposure to any expanded Alfred information, and knowing that he had the background as a soldier and served in World War II and fought with the French resistance stuff. He doesn't have to be a superhero. He doesn't have to be he's not Sergeant Rock here, but he did serve. He has some, particularly things with the field addressing and stuff. You understand where we'd have that knowledge base where he can help Batman with this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, he's still the support staff for the Batman. But it makes sense that he has that kind of background given the extraordinary circumstances that he has to rise to meet in order to help the Batman.
Cosign. The Alfred piece in particular, I didn't know any of that backstory about Alfred. I have at times thought, okay, they've packed up too much backstory into Alfred, but I've come off of that. And we say, okay, he wasn't exactly Sergeant Rock. He wasn't, but he was fighting Nazis in occupied territory alongside the French resistance. He wasn't an infantry sergeant, but that's still really cool, you know? So I had a lot of respect for Alfred coming out of this, and even his stage work, his work as an actor. I mean, they perfectly designed him to be somebody who had all the skills that he would need to support Bruce Wayne in his crusade.
There are so many instances, especially in the Silver Age, of Alfred having to pretend to be either Bruce Wayne or Batman. You need a high-grade thespian to pull that off. So it gets built into the character this way.
Yeah, it was perfect.
Plus, all the World War II stuff also explains how you could have a romance with Mademoiselle Marie and have an illegitimate daughter floating around there that they've played with on occasion.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it's necessary for him to have that background, but that daughter has a lot to live up to with Alfred and Mademoiselle Marie as her parents.
And of course, this issue has one of the classic table full of pictures of characters from this book. So we've got all the villains on here and some of the supporting players and such. This was probably my first exposure to the Red Hood background, to the Joker, and that he actually had an origin story. You've got the first time I was exposed to a Two-Face origin story, probably. Again, you get a lot of bang in these individual issues.
Yeah, in my head, this was the origin of the Joker up until the Killing Joke when they messed with it and basically said that probably is, but maybe it isn't. And yeah, this gives you the summary origins of Robin and Two-Face and everybody. And my memory is failing me. This is also the issue where they're trying to figure out who the suspects are, and Batman just throws a file of the photos of all his rogues out on the table in the Batcave, and that image is burned into my head too.
So since this is a Batmobile-centric issue, do you have a favorite Batmobile?
Oh, wow. Favorite Batmobile? My favorite Batmobiles are the ones that look like the muscle cars. So I cannot tell you specifically which one it was, but it was, I'm going to say late 80s, Norm Breyfogle, looked like a cross between a Corvette and a Viper.
I think I'm still open to a perfect Batmobile because a lot of my opinion of what a Batmobile should look like was informed by the 70s cartoon of all things. And I don't know if the Batmobile was in Super Friends. I want to say yeah, but if not, then it was New Adventures in 77. And of course, the late 70s, early 80s Batmobiles, which basically took the Batman iconography and just turned it into a car. You know, you've got the Batman head on the car and such. And when I look at the individual ones, though, none of them actually was like the perfect Batmobile for me. So after looking at all the Batmobiles over and over again, I finally just landed back on Batman 66, the red and the black, even though there's no reason why it should be red. But I just have it's a great looking car, and it's probably the only one that I can close my eyes and like draw from memory without screwing up a lot of the details. But pretty much every other Batmobile I'd probably screw up. You know, I'm not as excited about the 1940s one where it's basically just a period car with a bat head on the top in front of it, things like that.
Yeah, shaped like a cow catcher.
Yeah. Probably Batman 66, but just as a default. I'm still waiting for my perfect Batmobile to be designed.
I am torn on the convertible aspect because, or really it's not even convertible, it's just open hood. Because on the one hand, that's just screaming to be shot at. Apologies to Dallas, Texas. But on the other hand, they can jump out of it quickly, and that happens all the time, either in the TV series or in the comics that feature those style cars.
Moving on to the Penguin, Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot channeled the rage he felt in his childhood of being mocked for his appearance by becoming the criminal mastermind, the Penguin. Armed with an arsenal of customized umbrellas which can, among other things, shoot bullets, spray deadly gas, and even fly, the Penguin executes thefts that center on bird themes. His squat and awkward physiognomy and almost silly appearance often causes adversaries to underestimate his cruel cunning. The Penguin debuted in December 1941's Detective Comics number 58, credited to Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Like the Joker, he emerged more or less fully formed, a semi-sophisticate with trick umbrellas and bird-themed crimes. Although he had to wait until his fifth appearance in 1942's Detective Comics number 67, Oswald had his fair share of covers. With nearly 36 Golden Age appearances and another 36 in the pre-crisis period, the Penguin was indisputably a top 3 foe of Batman's initial half-century. Although he dabbled with other Batman rogues and cameos in outside titles, his first big extra Gotham outing was 1968's Justice League of America number 61, where he joined a random villain collective. Like Scarecrow, he used his media presence to dip into the Super Friends comic, but in the first 2 issues from 1976. As with most Batman rogues, he continued to pop up sporadically in the mandatory Detective Comics number 526 and Batman number 400, plus a couple of turns in Crisis on Infinite Earths besides. As is typical, the Penguin made his live-action debut on the 1966 Batman TV show, episodes 3 and 4, embodied by Burgess Meredith, who reprised for Batman the movie. Next, he was on the premiere episode of 1968's The Adventures of Batman cartoon, voiced again by Ted Knight, who was also on hand for 1972's second and 15th New Scooby-Doo movies. Lenny Weinrib provided the voice for 1977's The New Adventures of Batman, and Robert Morse for 1985's The Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians. The Penguin also had Mego action figures as part of the 8-inch World's Greatest Superheroes line from 1974, and 3 3/4-inch Comic Action Heroes from 1976, plus 1984's Kenner 4.5-inch Superpowers collection. This entry both doubles and triples down, Mike Mignola returning for Saga the Dark Knight, Card 49, Nemesis the Penguin. A dapper Oswald is standing in 3/4 profile, in black, surrounded by blackness, resting his umbrella like a cane, with 2 large birds resting behind him. What do we think about this imagery?
It's another home run by Mignola. It's amazing how much of this image is actually just blackness, not blackness with shading, but just black ink on the page. Or maybe he did it on black paper and added in the white and the other colors. But to me, the essence of Cobblepot is brutality with the veneer of elegance. When I was a kid, he was just a character who pulled heists that were bird themed or used birds or umbrellas, and there was nothing terribly compelling about him. He was somebody who very much benefited from the post-crisis changes and the redarkening of Batman that started in the 70s, where he became this crime lord and a mastermind behind the scenes. You don't fully get the brutality in this image, but it's implied. Every other aspect of him is right there on the page.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of a Scarface vibe in terms of the posture. And you're right, he does so much with so little. He communicates the gangster. He communicates the upper class qualities. He gets the bird theme in the midst of it. It's just so much is there already for you. When I was a kid, I definitely saw Penguin as comical. You know, he's in the blue and he's doing the bird themed and the umbrella themed heists. And, you know, he's just kind of goofy and over the top. And he was actually one of the ones I read a comic book of. I picked up 1982's The Brave and the Bold number 185, which was a Green Arrow team up. It was by Don Krar, who I've never heard of, and then Adrian Gonzalez. And my brother had the Superpowers action figure, but I couldn't really take him seriously. Certainly with Batman 66, Burgess Meredith was one of the best and most prominent of the actors, and I love the wah 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 Penguin. He's definitely up there with the what part of the quartet of the core Batman 66 villains. So I love that about him, but I couldn't take him seriously until I don't know if it was the greatest Batman stories ever told, or when they did the second volume that spotlighted Penguin and Catwoman stories when they did the Batman Returns movie. But getting to read the original Penguin stories and see what a gangster he was, and to be able to contrast them against the other Batman rogues, because where they were sympathetic and they had mental health issues, he was just a gangster. He was a crook. He was a bad dude who was in full command of his choices, more menacing. And when he shot somebody, he meant it. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm off the meds. He's just a straight up gangster. And I came to respect him a lot more when I read those earlier stories. And then, of course, as you said, the rehabbing that they did with him, particularly in the 80s and 90s.
I always appreciated that not everybody in Gotham, not every criminal in Gotham City, not even every flamboyant criminal had to be somebody who was insane. They never showed the Penguin in Arkham, nor should they have.
And then we've got Two-Face. Crime is the double-edged sword that made and broke Harvey Dent. At first a remarkably successful assistant district attorney with secret ties to the Batman, Dent grew overzealous and unstable. Beaten as a child, Harvey carried a deep, buried psychosis, which burst to the surface when half his face was scarred by acid. He became Two-Face, the duality-obsessed criminal genius who bases every decision on the flip of his scarred coin. Two-Face debuted in August 1942's Detective Comics number 66, credited to Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Kane stated he was inspired by the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the Phantom of the Opera in creating the dualistic character, but also suggested Finger had borrowed the facially scarred district attorney angle from the pulp vigilante The Black Bat. Harvey Kent made his only 5 appearances in the Golden Age through 1953, before being deemed too gruesome for the Comics Code Authority, vanishing for nearly 20 years. Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams revived Harvey Dent for 1971's Batman number 234, with 20 appearances in that decade alone. He remained prolific in the 1980s, with 12 more appearances before the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This entry is another double and a quadruple, as you have Brian Stelfreeze painting card number 48, Nemesis Two-Face, Harvey Dent in a double negative black and white suit, looking down at a piece of broken mirror that's dripping blood from his left hand, where he views his scarred left side. His right hand flips a coin. What do you think about this image?
Yeah, it's another one that communicates a lot of what you need to know about the character. Although I will say it's a little difficult to realize that he's flipping the coin. You kind of have to know who the character is and to know that that's a trope to see that that's what's happening. Once you know that, then it's a really cool stylized way to show it. And they even showing the glint off the coin, like it's like the light is hitting it. The mirror is perfect. You don't actually see the monstrous side or the scarred side of Two-Face directly. You only see it through the mirror, and the bloody hand probably symbolizing the blood that he spilled as Two-Face. The actual facial features of Harvey Dent, he almost looks like Bruce Wayne. It's almost too strong and too beefy a characterization, but that's okay. The rest of the image is so awesome. I don't mind. The black and white suit with a split in half black and white tie, shirt and jacket, and everything alternating. I would love to wear something like that.
I wish I could pull something like that off.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, no, exactly like you said. Like if you look at the face that's presented to us as opposed to the reflection of the mirror, that's a very Mike Zeck looking face. We're calling Mike Zeck on Bruce Wayne and also Frank Castle. But then you look at the body and you look at the coin and everything's so abstract. It's very Bill Sienkiewicz. So it's weird that there's a Brian Stelfreeze image where I'm thinking about two other artists before I think about the guy who actually painted it. And it's very conceptual. A lot of, particularly like you said, the coin is very abstract. But I dig it a lot. It's beautiful. It's an interesting choice of colors. It's funny because the colors are so muted. Sometimes Two-Face can be a very garish character, and Stelfreeze is very restraining of the character and his interpretation. But it's a great image. I love the piece.
Yeah, and good call on Zeck, and especially Sienkiewicz. That's exactly who he's evoking here. I don't mind an artist being inspired by other folks, especially when he's drawing in multiple references.
So Two-Face is, I think, an interesting case because so far we've been talking about all these characters and they're all super iconic and they're highly adapted. And then you get to Two-Face, and this dude had nothing in terms of media representation up until the 90s. Do you remember when you were exposed to, as opposed to everybody else that we've talked about, do you remember when you were first exposed to Two-Face?
It was definitely in the comics, and it was definitely as a kid. And yeah, I'd never, he wasn't on Super Friends. He wasn't in Batman 66. If I remember correctly, there's a story that he's the villain they never got to. He was definitely in the comics. And to be honest, when I was a kid, he showed up in the comics a lot. He showed up more than Joker. And I think he's always been meant to be a lot of Batman's characters are mirrors in some way. I think he was, until the Wrath came along, he was portrayed as the most direct mirror. He was never my favorite. I always appreciated, though, that they showed Batman trying to reach Harvey Dent and that he still remembered Harvey Dent as his friend, and he still believed that Two-Face was redeemable and could be brought back.
Two-Face was not somebody I had a lot of awareness of as a kid. I probably would have seen him in Batman from the 30s to the 70s if I checked that out from the library. So I was probably like, who's this weird green-faced dude that I've never seen anywhere else before? I specifically remember picking up 1986's Batman number 397 by Doug Minch and Tom Mandrake. I think I got it as a ding discount book at a comic shop. I didn't know who this dude was. He just seemed like a kind of a thug to me. And it wasn't until I started looking at stuff like 1989's The Greatest Batman Stories Ever Told that I got a better sense of what he meant over the course of Batman comics, because he's very well represented in the comic books. It's just I didn't read those comics. So this guy was sort of a mystery to me for a long time there. I would only see him in this archival material. And then, of course, he turns up in Dark Knight Returns. But that's, well, after like the primal period where I'm getting introduced to the Batman characters. So for me, he's always been a little bit like teared down because he wasn't one of the guys who got that media representation. Especially my early exposures to him, he just seemed like a gangster. So he didn't resonate with me in those early days.
Yeah, I had the advantage of I was reading Batman early, and I've done a little bit of Googling here. 329 and 346 in the original Batman series, both Two-Face stories with iconic covers. 346 has a split cover that is perfect for the character. And then later on, they incorporated that Two-Face had some sort of beef or grudge specifically with Robin. And I think that was kind of invented. It wasn't something that was referenced earlier. It was one of those retcons where they acted like that had always been there. I think it was a good addition to the character.
Alfred Beagle was created for the first Batman movie serial by screenwriters Victor McLeod, Leslie Swabacker, and Harry Fraser. He was, however, introduced in the comics first by Don Cameron and Jerry Robinson, with perhaps some contribution from Bob Kane for April-May 1941's Batman number 16. His origin was similar to the Alfred of Untold legend, except rather than being a British soldier that had fought the Nazis in the past, he was a British butler who ran afoul of the Axis while journeying from Britain to the United States. In both versions, Alfred honored his father Jarvis's deathbed wish that his son should continue a generational legacy of service to the Wayne family. Also, both forced themselves into the lives of Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson, stumbled upon their double lives, and became the key support system of the dynamic duo. However, Alfred Beagle was shorter, fatter, and balder, including being clean-shaven. He was also more of a detective, and slimmed down to better assist the Batman and Robin of Earth 2. In truth, DC wanted to better model the actor who ended up playing Alfred in the movie serial, and made the change in 1944. Alfred Beagle evolved over the Golden Age into the more recognizable Alfred Pennyworth, as he was renamed in 1969. Pre-crisis, a crisis of conscience was added. The war veteran Alfred returned to his first love, live theater acting, but gave it up for his father. For a few years, Alfred was believed dead, but was revived as the villain the Outsider, before eventually reverting to normal. Later in the Bronze Age, it was revealed that Alfred had conceived an illegitimate daughter with the French resistance fighter Mademoiselle Marie during a wartime tryst. But Julia Remarque was wiped out of continuity after the Crisis on Infinite Earths. In post-Crisis continuity, Alfred had been the Wayne's butler since Bruce was very young, and acted as a surrogate father after Bruce was orphaned. His theater background came in handy when he trained young Bruce in vocal mimicry and disguise. As with Bruce, Alfred raised each of the Robins to varying degrees. Alfred quit Bruce at least once, during a particularly self-destructive streak after Bane had put him in a wheelchair. In 2020, Alfred died from a broken neck, delivered by Bane, and a writer who you just know wrecked other kids' toys when he was a rotten little brat. By benefit of being closely associated with one of the most prominent comic book characters early in his career, Alfred has appeared in more media than 99% of actual superheroes. As previously mentioned, 1943 serial actor William Austin defined the look of Alfred in comics, even if that's rarely reflected in later live action. Eric Wilton succeeded him in the 1948 Batman and Robin serial without the mustache. Alan Napier brought the stash back, but with a full head of white hair and thick-framed glasses, looking more like the comic book Commissioner Gordon. Animation voice actors across the decades included Olin Soule, William Calloway, Andrei Stojka, and Clive Revel, before being defined for the Batman the Animated Series generation by Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Michael Goff was Alfred in the first cycle of blockbuster Batman films under Burton and Schumacher, leveling up considerably when Nolan cast Michael Caine for the Dark Knight trilogy. Jeremy Irons and Andy Serkis have taken their turns since, for Snyder and Reeves respectively. There have been a few dozen other voice actors that I'll be skipping, among them Ralph Fiennes, Anthony Head, and James Cromwell. There's also been a few more television actors. While Alan Napier remains the longest serving Alfred across 120 episodes of the Batman 66 series, he has close competition from Sean Pertwee, who did 100 episodes of the 2014 through 2019 running Gotham series on Fox. But we would be remiss to exclude Jack Bannon, who portrayed Alfred in 30 episodes across 3 seasons of the Epix prequel series, Pennyworth. Who is your favorite Alfred Pennyworth actor?
Sean Pertwee. The Gotham TV series communicated the military aspects of Alfred's background better with Sean Pertwee than with anybody else. I don't think they did as much with the theater aspects as they should have, but he was just so likable a character, and he was so believable as somebody who was doing everything he could to defend Bruce and protect him and train him, that I loved his portrayal. How about you?
In terms of cinema, I've kind of struggled. Like, for some reason, they always seem to think that they can just cast whoever they want to as Alfred in the movies and such. I want to see the Alfred that we see pictured here. This is my mental image of what Alfred looks like, and he never looks like this in media. So it's very frustrating for me. Now, in terms of just performance overall, I would have to go with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. from the cartoon. I think he nails the voice, and the cartoon looks more like Alfred than any of the multimedia representations of the character. So he'd be my favorite, but there's still room for somebody to come along and be my Alfred actor. I don't think I've seen that person in movies yet.
Yeah, although I think several of them have portrayed the dry wit that we all enjoy so much about Alfred. Michael Caine, can't remember his first name, but last name Gao.
The Burton movies.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Michael Go, or I don't know how you pronounce it. I say Michael Go, but I don't know how it's supposed to actually be pronounced. I think it's actually Goff. Now to think about it.
Yeah, it may be. But anyway, in most interpretations, people key in on the fact that he's the guy who's taking the Mickey out of Batman. I love that because somebody has to.
I saw that in animation, Ralph Fiennes was one of the people that voiced Alfred. I would actually like to see that in live action. I think that if Ralph Fiennes played Alfred in live action, particularly with the mustache, he would probably be my Alfred.
I agree with that. The other thing about Ralph Fiennes is he can be menacing, and Alfred has to be this warm and loving, supportive father figure, but he also has to be able to turn on a dime and be this old guy you don't want to mess with. And I think he could carry that off.
This is another character that there's like kind of 2 Alfreds for me. There's the Proto and my conception of him. And the Proto would be definitely more the Batman 66 version, where he's a little bit more servile and more genteel. And then you've got the later version that is more sarcastic and, like you said, undercuts Batman and contrasts like, oh, this is what you're going to do, and I kind of try to bring it back down to earth. And what I've seen credited in the past was that it was Frank Miller being inspired by Sir John Gielgud's character from the movie Arthur, the Dudley Moore movie. I've never seen Arthur myself, but as somebody who was reading Batman material in the 70s and early 80s before Arthur even was released, much less Frank Miller was riffing off of it, do you feel like there was a significant change, or do you think that the character was already trending in that direction and just Miller they accelerated it by having that specific portrayal to work off of?
I think that Miller amped up the spasm a little bit, and noticeably so, and then it carried through. He was more portrayed in the comics as servile in the Batman 66 mold, although in the comics, even in the 70s and 80s, he was a more substantive character than the portrayal in Batman 66. He had more going on. He had a backstory that would come into play sometimes. He was more fleshed out. And he would come into conflict with Batman sometimes over his decisions. But I guess Miller just made him funnier.
Yeah, there you go. And that, a little humor goes a long way with Batman. We need that humor in there. Even little tastes of it here and there. You need some of it because it's not like Batman's going to bring the funny.
Exactly.
We return to Batman Secret Files #1 for Alfred by the same team of Scott Beatty, Lee Weeks, and Tom McCraw. He's seated on a wooden chair, darning a bat glove with a utility belt on his lap. Behind him, Batman's cape and cowl is pinned to a fireplace with a portrait of Martha and Thomas Wayne hanging above.
Another one where they communicate so much. You've got the Thomas and Martha, I'm not going to say it in that voice, looking down on not just Alfred, but really all of Wayne Manor and everything that's happening. You've got the cape up. I presume it's drying. Alfred is doing repairs, and that's maybe next on the list. But it's the mantle of the bat overlooking Alfred as he's repairing a gauntlet or glove. And then he's got for some reason, he's got the utility belt across his lap, but it's my pouched utility belt that I love, and a cat sitting in front of him. And it's almost Norman Rockwell, and at the same time, it's still Batman.
Definitely a perverse Norman Rockwell. Yeah. I totally agree. Lee Weeks is a great guy to do anything Batman related, and very thoughtful presentation. You could see this format is restrictive. You only get 2/3 of a page to work with. And Weeks just does the absolute best with it, where he just layers on background materials to tell you who the character is and form your opinion of them. So really great job here. And then in the case of Alfred, he's another one like Jim Gordon. There's never been a point where I've disliked Alfred. I think he serves his role so well. He's such a unique presence in comics. Other people have tried to be Alfred-like, and you always catch them. It's like, oh, you're just doing an Alfred, right? Because Alfred's the original, Alfred's the OG. Alfred is always the one, he's the blueprint, whatever you want to call it. So I love the character, and I actually, like you said, I like the background that allows him to do the things that he does, because you can't just be a guy who dusts the bookcase and do the stuff that Alfred does. So he has to have a background to support that.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I will say is they portray Alfred as getting far too much done. Alfred makes me feel guilty for how much I don't get done. It's much more plausible to me that Wayne Manor would have a staff, maybe nobody who's staying overnight, but there are people who are cleaning and maintaining the place and keeping the grounds. And I think they should show that sometimes. And he's supervising them, and he's Bruce Wayne's right hand. But when they brought in other people to show, okay, there's somebody else who actually maintains the car and things like that, he can't know everything, and he can't be everywhere at the same time. So I appreciate when they show that he's just the head of an entire support team.
I follow that under bat bowel movements, as I know that he has to go poopy, but I don't have to see it. So that's part of like suspension of disbelief. It's like, obviously you cannot clean a mansion like that. Like whenever they show the mansion and it's full of cobwebs and dust, that's what it should look like if it was just Alfred running the place, It's not like, oh, we've abandoned it. Literally, if it's just Alfred, that's how it would look anyway. You would never be able to pull off the dull life of Bruce Wayne, because everybody would wonder why he lives in such a shabby abode,
But again, if I go back to 70s and 80s Bruce Wayne, who's like, he actually has events at his house and stuff like that, then he has people for this. And he should be employing people. He's supposed to be a community leader.
Sensing a story in a mysterious note addressed to Superman, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen rented a boat and rowed out on North Bay, where they found an unconscious boy in a rowboat. On their way back to shore with the boy, they were run down by a large speedboat and were near drowning when Superman appeared and rescued them. At a doctor's house, the boy revived and identified himself as Dick Grayson. He said he had sent the note to Superman and was in great trouble, but refused to discuss the matter with anyone but the Man of Steel. Yes, it's Superman, the Man of Steel. And today, Robin, youthful assistant of the famous Batman, tells him why he so desperately needs his help. But before we join them for the exciting story, let's hear from Dan McCullough. Okay, Dan?
Say, gang, the other day an Army pilot I know was over at my house looking at some pet model planes I had. And he made a very interesting remark. He said that these pet planes were some of the best models he'd ever seen for identification work. And he thought that all of you ought to be able to learn a lot from them. And I'll bet you have, too, if you've been making that super delicious cereal, Kellogg's Pep, your own special breakfast. Because right inside every single Pep package, there's a colored cardboard plane model all ready for you to put together. And you don't have to send in a single penny for it, not even a box top. What's more, there are 14 different models you can get all together. 4 British, 2 Russian, and 8 American. And on the back of each model, there's a list of valuable pointers on how to spot that particular plane, as well as a general description of it. So, gang, if you haven't yet started your collection of these nifty plane models, get busy right away. Be sure your mother gets you a package of those golden, delicious whole wheat flakes tomorrow. See which model plane you find inside. And remember the name, Pep, P-E-P. Pep is made by Kellogg's in Battle Creek.
Attention all personnel. New from the Fire and Water Podcast Network, it's MASHcast. Hosted by MASH megafan Rob Kelly and a rotating cast of VIPs, MASHcast analyzes, episode by episode, the greatest television series of all time, MASH. Find MASHcast on fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Jocularity!
Criminally insane, obsessed with hats, lethal tea parties, and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland uses his headgear-concealed electronic devices to alter and control brainwave patterns of zombie-like puppet wearers. Pet Chimp Bites, apprehended numerous times by Batman. DC Comics' version of the Mad Hatter first appeared in the October-November 1948 cover dated Batman number 49. Library of Congress copyright records state that the actual day of release was August the 11th. This distinction will be important soon. Both in life and in story, Jervis Tetch was inspired by the character from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, though the Batman villain is posthumously credited to Bill Finger and Lou Sayer Schwartz, and is contractually required to claim it was Bob Kane. In his first story, Mad Hatter was simply a little person robber who led a gang and pulled weapons out of his hat. The story was more focused on Vicky Vale in her debut, coming very close to proving her beau Bruce Wayne's dual identity. Sitting out most of the next 8 years, the Silver Age Mad Hatter grew a mustache and a couple of feet in height for 1956's Detective Comics number 230. This version was fanatical about haberdashery, seeking the Dark Knight's cowl. Nearly another 8 years passed before this Mad Hatter turned up again, and a half decade after that for his third pass. That 1968 tale was him working with the Penguin, Catwoman, and the Joker, which helped his standing, but also Clue Master, Getaway Genius, and Johnny Wits, which surely did not. Circumstances were similar 9 years later, where he's one of a slew of villains featured in 1977's Where Were You the Night Batman Was Killed, where all of his Silver Age stories focused on just hats. The Bronze Age began to put the Carroll back into the Mad Hatter. Despite it barely being a cameo role, the Hatter turned up in all 4 issues of the arc, and then a solo spotlight a few issues later, although he was back to playing with various outfits themed around his hats. It took until 1982's Detective Comics number 510 for Tetch to shave his stash and commit to the Wonderland Mad Hatter tropes that he's known for today. In media, Mad Hatter made his debut in live action in 1966 on the 13th and 14th episodes of Batman, played by David Wayne, and made his animation bow on a 1968 The Batman Superman Hour cartoon, voiced by Ted Knight. The penultimate trading card is from another set, 1996's SkyBox Batman Master Series, card number 48, painted by Dermot Power. It features a very ginger Jervis Tetch, hat in hand, very sullen, as he gets his mug shot taken from full profile and straight on.
This is a very cartoony image and very stylized, but it definitely what it communicates is that Jervis Tetch is miserable because he's been arrested. He doesn't look terribly menacing in this, but I don't think the character himself is supposed to look that menacing. He's just supposed to look weird. But you got the hat, you've got the Alice in Wonderland Mad Hatter getup. It's not pretty because Jervis Tetch is not pretty, but it tells you who he is.
I think it's a nice enough image from the Bisley School, but that's one of the things is Simon Bisley is such a specific image, so Frazetta indebted, but also everything's metal. It's all about hot chicks and lumps of metal in people's hands and stuff. And the fact that we're looking at the Mad Hatter with like visible bicep bulging in his little coat is like, come on, dude, calm down. So it's a nice image from that school, but that school is kind of ridiculous applied to anything that's supposed to be grounded in reality to the degree that Mad Hatter ever could be. But it's a fun image, and I do like that it's a mugshot. I like seeing these guys in their caught mode, their find out mode. So yeah, let's see the bad guys get busted, not just in their glorious criminal ways and stuff.
It is nice to see him humbled. Now, Tetch as a character is historically was kind of one note for me. The whole, I'm going to use hats to control your mind. But when Grant Morrison, as part of Arkham Asylum, brought in the idea that he was focused on little girls, I could have done without that. Don't necessarily need that in my escapism, but he looks creepy enough. So whatever.
Mad Hatter is another one of these dudes that I just had no real appreciation of, no real knowledge of. I understand that he was on the Batman 66 show, but I think he was one of those guys like Egghead, where I'd see him and be like, that's not a real one. That's one of the ones they do on the show, and kind of ignoring it. And so like in terms of comic books, I don't think again, another one of these 80s dudes, I remember seeing the Mad Hatter on 1987's Detective Comics number 573, another Mike Barr, Alan Davis issue, and I did not pick it up. I did not have any interest in it. The sex pest stuff creeps me out. It gets a little too real. It's a little too far from the fantasy. I think the character is too indebted to Alice in Wonderland to the point where it just feels like, I don't think he does enough to transform the character to being a Batman villain. It's the opposite of Scarecrow, where the concept of being a Scarecrow as a supervillain is owned by Batman. Having the Mad Hatter pop up in a Batman story, it's like, what are you doing here? Shouldn't we have an actual supervillain here? Shouldn't we have an actual Batman villain? I don't get the Mad Hatter. I've never really gotten him. And nothing that I'm seeing here is putting him over for me.
Now that you mention it, Batman gets a lot of villains from the Alice in Wonderland mythos. Remember Tweedledee and Tweedledum?
Yeah, I never was huge on them either.
Yeah, no.
That might be who's who thing that I don't have to deal with. So I'll be grateful if that's the case. I've never cared for those characters.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever even seen them in a story. I only know about them because of Who's Who. But it makes me wonder, is there like a back catalog where it's like the Caterpillar and the Queen of Hearts and everybody's going to pop up?
I want to say there is a Queen of Hearts out there, or at least maybe Batwoman had some of that too. Plus they made her sister Alice, right? So there's a lot of that imagery that they borrow from Carol for that's like, nah, get your own. Calm down, guys. You're tugging enough from Carol. You can stop now.
Yeah, waiting for the DC Jabberwocky now.
So on to our final entry, an ordinary man with an extraordinary mind that's driven him insane. If the Riddler can control the madness that forces him to commit puzzle crimes, he'd be one of the greatest geniuses alive. Our final entry, The Riddler, was created by Bill Finger and Dick Sprang for October 1948's Detective Comics number 140. Per copyright records, it came out a fortnight after the Mad Hatter's debut, around August 23rd, 1948. Noxious Quizzer Edward Nygma had nigh continuous dual appearances in the Golden Age, reappearing in Detective Comics number 142. Despite arriving fully formed, he was still shoved aside until 1965's Batman number 171. Excellent timing, though, since it gave him the visibility to move beyond comics, though he was back in 1966, 67, 68, 75, and 76. He did the Super Friends comic in 77, followed by the requisite issues of the Where Were You on the Night Batman Was Killed arc. Finally, the sporadic appearances, Anniversary, Crisis, Batman number 400 pipeline. Frank Gorshin originated the Riddler in live action on the very first episodes of the 1966 Batman TV show and in the movie. However, after 5 total episodes and an Emmy nomination, Gorshin wanted his salary doubled for a second season and was refused. The show's huge success had helped get rival show The Addams Family canceled, but Morticia and Lurch ended up with roles on Batman. Gomez Addams actor John Astin played Riddler in a pair of second season episodes, and Gorshin came back for one more in the third season. Obviously, Ted Knight served puzzles on the 68 animated Batman Superman Hour. The Riddler had an off-color cameo on 1977's The New Adventures of Batman, because he was already spoken for by Michael Bell on 1978's Challenge of the Super Friends. Frank Gorshin was back one last time for a 1979 NBC TV Legends of the Superheroes special. With the Joker and Penguin, Riddler is part of Mego's World's Greatest Superheroes and Bend and Flex lines. Our reference for this final entry is again a puffy DC Outburst Firepower card, number 43 specifically, drawn by Staz Johnson. The Riddler is in a skin-tight costume, standing like a ringmaster presenting an act, this time a bound Tim Drake Robin being lowered upside down into a molten vat behind him. Did you experience any of these embossed Outburst cards?
I think I ran across them, but I wasn't much of a card guy. Some of these I would have loved, and some of these are a little over the top. How about you?
I got a set. As a matter of fact, I if I remember correctly, I bought a box and packed it out and got most of the specials too.
Oh, cool.
So I will definitely be taking advantage of DC Firepower more than any other podcaster you've ever heard of for this project. What do you think about the actual art? I remember, did you like Staz Johnson when we covered Batman Aliens 2?
Yeah, I did. And then this is good, although my conception of what the Riddler should look like, he needs a haircut here. This is very definitely the Frank Gorshin Riddler, and I appreciate that because he was great. And this is the bodysuit Riddler as opposed to the suit and tie Riddler. And I think I like the suit and tie look better, but this is good. And, and they should both get representation because they're both part of the history of the character. Robin is in a death trap and I'm holding the boy hostage and I'm in my showman pose. It's hard to communicate a riddle in a card or to do so graphically without using text, but the other aspects of the character, they're definitely showing well here, or Staz is showing well here.
I'm a believer in equal time, but typically you don't have any like sex gods portraying the Riddler, and things can get a little anatomical with this outfit. So I do also prefer the suit and tie, but I liked how this reflected the Silver Age, the original costume, and Gorshin in particular. Gorshin is my favorite of the Batman 66 villains. He just conveyed menace so well. And he does a lot of the things that people think the Joker is supposed to do, and I think he did it better than the Joker a lot of the time. I think the Joker's better as the Clown Prince, and the Riddler's better as the mastermind, and the person who comes up with the really intricate, almost Rube Goldbergian schemes and stuff. So yeah, I'm a fan of the Riddler. I wasn't as big on him as a kid because the costume was not A-class, but Gorshin's performance was so good. And as I got older and appreciated both that performance and just the character of the Riddler as a whole, he became one of my favorite Batman villains, but he was already kind of one of my favorites. And I just had to let go of the stuff that was hanging me up on the character. So yeah, I'm a fan. And I think this is good representation. I think Staz Johnson does a good job with the card.
Yeah, my favorite memory of the character is really from the animated series because I got to meet John Glover here in Tampa at a con, and he signed us a print of a cell from the series for us. The quote that he put by hand on the picture was, "If you're so smart, why aren't you rich?" So I still have that, and I really appreciate it because I thought he portrayed that mastermind aspect well.
Yeah, and that's an instance, too, where he would have been perfect in live action as well. Like, I could absolutely see him playing that character in live action. It's too bad he played an Atom villain instead for a Batman movie. He'd have been perfect, and he was great on the show, too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
To wrap up the episode, we got to look at Untold Legend of the Batman #3 was released on June 26th, 1980. It featured a 50-cent U.S. cover price and was edited by Paul Levitz. Cover art was again provided by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. The Dark Knight leaps slightly downward at the viewer from a fire escape against a crimson night sky. One hand is extended forward, the other backward toward the full moon that encases the logo and frames the figure. Likewise, half of the cape is sweeping forward, while the other waves up and backward.
Stand by. I want to look at it one more time because I remember liking it better than number 2. Oh, man. This is the one. This is in competition with the first one to be my favorite cover of the series. And it's the cover that they used for the paperback black and white version. It's just amazing because it really shows you a menacing Batman, very much the Neil Adams 1970s Batman kind of image in your face.
In my mind, I always picture this as being a Jim Aparo. How dare it be Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, despite praising his name? This is supposed to be Jim Aparo. This isn't supposed to be Jose Luis. This is one of my favorite Batman images ever. Whenever on social media, they're like, who's your Batman? And in an image, this is the image I reach for. Even though the eyes may be a little too close together, he looks a little bit squished on here. But I love this image. This is what I wanted on the Treasury. This is what was on my copy of the paperback. I bought that paperback at like a convenience store, and I'm sure it was either in anticipation of or during the late 80s Batmania craze. And that's how I read the story originally, and that's how I knew the story before the tabloid edition I picked up, because I had that paperback for years. And I still want to say I've got it somewhere. I can't believe I'd have ever parted with it because I had an affection for that presentation. I loved when they had those paperbacks. It was great for taking to school because you didn't have to like fully put on your geek flag, and you can still get away with reading comic books in class. But yeah, I love this image so much, and this is my Batman. This is in a single image. This is my Batman.
Yeah, I love the red background. I love the moon in the background, and it communicates the menace that blue and gray costume that we grew up with could still have.
Yeah, and my Batman wears blue and gray too. So that's a thing I just can't let go of. The Man Behind the Mask was written by Len Wein and drawn by Jim Aparo, who presumably did the lettering, with coloring by Glynis Wein. In need of a new Batmobile, Robin reaches out to Hollywood stuntman Jack Edison, introduced in this comic as owing his life to Batman. Edison apparently has the skills or connections for that task. Meanwhile, the Caped Crusader met with Commissioner Gordon, who pointed out that whoever was threatening and sabotaging him must be very close. Gordon then recalls his initial suspicion and eventual acceptance of the Dark Knight detective, then considers Batman's influence on his daughter Barbara, from teen crush to librarian to Batgirl to Congresswoman. In the daytime, Bruce returns to the Wayne Foundation, where he considers his relationship with the brains behind running his business, Lucius Fox. That night, Batman returns to remote and neglected Wayne Manor, where he's haunted by ghosts of the past. Caught in a crushing death trap on his way to the original Batcave, he's finally confronted by the saboteur, Bruce Wayne? Batman's alter ego wants to kill the Caped Crusader and finally live a life of his own, but the Dark Knight is rescued by his costumed father. Actually, Dick Grayson had restored the Batman party costume, but the shock had reoriented Batman back to reality after the split personality episode caused by a warehouse explosion. I think we can agree this is the weakest issue of the miniseries.
Yeah, well, it's almost like they're dealing with what's left of the Batman mythos, like pick up the miscellaneous bits. So, and there's some good miscellaneous bits. Commissioner Gordon, Barbara Gordon, Lucius Fox. I love Lucius Fox. I don't think he's featured enough. Having this guy who's a business guy and a tech guy that Batman can count on to cover his deficiencies as Bruce Wayne, I think is genius in the same way that Alfred is genius. I'll let you talk about the ending because I'm curious how you took that.
This is another one of those Batman's a nut boy and probably shouldn't be doing the things he's doing kind of books. You have the whole thing where it turns out that throughout the miniseries, we haven't talked a lot about the plot, but throughout the miniseries, Batman's been sabotaged in ways in which his Batcave would have to be compromised, his identity would have to be compromised. And so it turns out that the person who's sabotaging him is Batman himself, who took a blow from an explosion in a warehouse, and it gave him a dual identity. And the Bruce Wayne side of him was trying to kill the Batman side of him. Dick's got to dress up in the Thomas Wayne Batman costume, or actually a new version since that was destroyed, so that he can reconcile the two identities and do like a Leonard Samson, the Hulk kind of thing. And it's just like, it's bad psychology. I don't think it's great storytelling. This is the kind of thing I don't mind getting left behind when we move from the Bronze Age into the modern age, because I don't think this is beneficial to society, this kind of storytelling. I think it hurts perceptions of things like, people who have things like mental health crises and stuff. It trivializes it. It's just kind of goofy. As much as I appreciate the walk down memory lane and that they're trying to reconcile all the Silver Age stuff, because that's where a lot of this is derived from, and probably where a lot of the delays came from, was having to research all these particulars, like Batman having been Robin before he became Batman was from a Silver Age story. All this stuff is from Silver Age stories for the most part. And so I respect that Len Wein was trying to resolve that stuff, but a lot of it's goofy stuff, and a lot of it's barnacles. This is the exact kind of thing that we were trying to get rid of when we entered the post-crisis continuity.
I think you have a better understanding of the reality than I do, and I will take all of that on board. It does seem like a cheat, and it seems like a little bit of a cop-out, the way that it ends. And it's like, oh, well, the only person who could do this to me is me. Dick looks great in the restored original Batman costume. Like I said, I love that costume. The other thing is that this has no repercussions. And at the time in 1980, that was normal. We were used to that. But you get older and you look back and it's like, okay, this is a pretty serious, like you said, mental health crisis. And what it's really showing is that he needs to have he needs to have a more integrated life. And Bruce Wayne needs more time. And there was no discussion of that in the Batman comics going forward. The last few pages leave something to be desired, but the ride was great.
You're hysterical. Slap. Okay, I've come back to my senses. But I have to agree with you, like the Lucius Fox stuff. Lucius Fox was not around during my comics reading in this period. Like I didn't read enough solo Batman stuff. He wasn't in the team up stuff. He wasn't on any of the cartoons. So this was the first time I ever was exposed to Lucius Fox, I'm sure. I doubt I'd ever seen it anyplace else. And I thought it was a great addition to the Batman canon. I'm so grateful to Christopher Nolan for having that character be so prominent in the Dark Knight trilogy. Morgan Freeman obviously did a wonderful job portraying the character. And yeah, this is a guy who's essential. You can't have a grounded, realistic Batman in our modern understanding of how things work without someone like Lucius Fox running things. And yeah, he's a great character. I love that dude. But it's also funny because you've got stuff like Jack Edison, the stuntman, who apparently works on the Batman's cars, and he's one of those no-prize guys that helps fill in stuff that you talked about appreciating. And apparently this is like his first and almost only appearance. He only ever appears one more time in a Blue Devil comic of all things. So I'll get to cover that at some point with Shag. But yeah, this dude was introduced just for the story, and then they never exploited him again. Of course, years later, we get Harold in a similar position.
And I appreciated Harold for the same reasons. I didn't know Jack Edison appeared in a Blue Devil comic. That's awesome, because that's not a huge community, or at least I don't think it is, of Hollywood stuntmen. You would expect him to show up, in the Blue Devil's life. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's great that they remembered to do that callback.
Yeah.
There's also a bonus secret file entry from the book in Secrets of the Batcave by Lynn Wein and Joe Staten. We see a quasi-cutaway of the second Batcave under the Wayne Foundation building, with illustrated highlights like work and repair shops, laboratory, study, computerized crime files, and trophy room. After the 2-page spread, a third page offers an exterior overview of the Wayne Manor Batcave, then the components of the utility belt, plus shots of 3 aircraft, Batplane, Batcopter, and Whirly Bat. Some of this stuff might have gotten recycled for Who's Who. I'd have to double check, but it's always neat to have this kind of back matter. And this is an instance where I'm happy to have it in the Treasury Edition, because you really want to blow it up to map size if you can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I ate all of that stuff up as a kid. The diagrams of the headquarters and the cave and the weapons and the gear and the vehicles. I appreciate it probably more than a 50-something-year-old man should now.
When Batman hadn't returned by dinner time like he said he would, I began to get a little nervous. And when he wasn't home by 10 o'clock and then by 11, I was really worried. I decided to wait another hour and then call the police and start looking for him. But then Alfred, he's our butler, came into the living room while I was watching the clock.
I say, Master Dick, we seem to be getting company.
You mean Batman's back, Alfred?
Unfortunately, no. But I was just out in the garden, and I observed half a dozen men sneaking up from the beach. They seem to be surrounding the house.
What?
Quite. And the Bounders have guns. We seem to be in a bit of a predicament. What?
We'll return in a moment for the climax of today's episode. But first...
Hello there. Come on in and welcome to the Fantastic Pour. I am your host, Brett Young, and this is the podcast serving up comics, cocktails, and conversation for your listening pleasure. Every episode, I'll welcome a guest to the Fantastic Lounge to explore one of their favorite comic book characters and cover a classic story in which they're featured. And what pairs better with great literature than a delicious drink? Based on my guest's ingredient of choice, we'll mix up a cocktail or mocktail to enjoy in the Fantastic Lounge while we talk comics, mixology, history, and whatever else comes to mind. So join me every month for the Fantastic Pour, open for business by the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
As we continue now, Kent is pacing nervously before the entrance to the River of Horrors concession as a tall, masked figure wearing a bright blue hood and cape approaches. Listen.
Kent! Clark Kent! Batman! What are you doing here?
I got word that Dick Grayson and Jimmy Olsen were in trouble.
So did I. Have you seen them?
No, not yet. I was to meet them right here in front of the River of Horrors.
Yeah, Jim told me to meet them here, too.
What were your favorite files this episode?
My favorite image has to be Scarecrow. Second to that is probably the Penguin, which shows that I have a strong Mignola bias here. But Alfred and Batman were also outstanding. How about you?
I'm going to go with Penguin from Mignola and Two-Face from Stelfreeze. But with those artists, you could easily switch it to the Catwoman and the Scarecrow, and I'd be just as happy. So the really great art showcases this time. All these are just excellent representations of the characters, but those particular artists I love the most.
All good choices.
And were there any promos in particular you wanted me to run, since you don't have like your own show? But I know in particular I wanted to make a point of running Fantastic Pour, because the reason why we didn't have a Robin segment this episode is I listened to that episode and you spend about an hour or so talking about Dick Grayson. And I'm like, great, I can talk to you about all the other Batman characters because I'm going to have somebody else cover Dick Grayson. They already picked that character.
So that was a great experience. And also I have an appearance on Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow coming up with Mike Atchison that I really enjoyed talking with him about a comic that's about as far from superhero comics as you can imagine. Just had a great time talking with him. So if you can get Mike some love, I'd appreciate it.
And is there any place else we can hear you from in the coming future or something recently that I missed?
Not yet. And honestly, I'm sure I'm forgetting some appearances. I think I've got a couple coming up on the Long Box Crusade, Amazing Spider-Man Chronicles, and oh man, there's some old-timey adventurers who get featured on there that I've got some time talking about, but I don't know when they're coming out, but we can look forward to those. Looks like that's going to do it for today, but I can also print out a list of your confidential communiques for the road.
All Around Arbiter, Alan Boyce Jr., Ascani Sun 22, The Bat Pod, The Best Pesto, Between the Pages Blog, Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, Visunors 007, Dave's Comic Heroes Blog, Ed Moore at Teal Productions, Hell Collage, Hicks, The Irredeemable Shag, Jarrett Keene, Jim Imbruglia, SCTV Forever, Just a Fan, Justin Steiner, Keith G. Baker, Like the Starfish, Michael, who added another enjoyable episode, Noah Tarnow, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, St. Piers, Brainy Pirate, Stop, Let's Team Up, Gallifrey's Most Wanted, and The Telltale Mind. Now that we've revealed our secret files, it's time for your orations. Let us know your thoughts. Share your opinions by recording an audio file that we can run on the air, emailing us at rolledspinepodcast@gmail.com, leave a comment on the Rolled Spine devoted blog for this episode, or maybe on the Tumblr gallery. Tweet us at Rolled Spine on Twitter, or Skeet Diablo Frank at Blue Sky. We may be old men, but not so old that we're still on Facebook. So, what will be the topic next month? Sorry, folks, they wouldn't be secret files if I gave them away. You'll just have to do your part by listening for each episode. And frankly, from month to month, I don't necessarily know what the next episode is going to be anyway. But thanks to everyone for tuning in. I've been Frank.
And I've been Captain Entropy.
As always, we leave you with a question for the next episode.
Do you want to hear a secret?
Not to take another shot at Jose Fixit, but in a nighttime town like Gotham City, he passes out pretty soon after the sun goes down these days. I guess none of us are getting any younger, but my chat with the captain had started pretty late, and I wasn't sure what kind of misadventure I had ahead of me trying to hail a taxi in this dirty town. I thought it was a pleasant surprise when the lady bot I'd sent to the Themyscira embassy showed up in a car. That was, until she started talking.
Frank, Rob Kelly wants to have a word with you at Fire and Water Network headquarters. It seems that one of their top men has been taken into custody over the incident that diverted you.
And that pretty much picks up where we left off with Ed Moore. He helped arrange my entry into this National Bureau of Investigation holding facility, with a sturdy-looking guard sizing me up.
D.E.O, huh? Who are you here to see?
The most irredeemable man here.
Look, Mr. Comedian, this is a federal pen. We got nothing but the irredeemable here, or their fancy lawyers would have kept them on the streets.
It's me! He's looking for me! I'm the most irredeemable person here for a guy that's still able to get out of here. Pretty please with sugar on top. Frank, over here! I miss my family. Frank, will you help a brother out, please?